Hold it up. It's 2017.
Good evening, everybody. Those of you that have seats, please sit down. If there's any other seats, because we've got a number of people standing, please find a seat. It looks to me like they're all taken. But welcome on October 2nd. And before we get started here, ladies and gentlemen, I would love everybody to bow their head in a moment of silence for the support and respect for the victims and the horrific thing that happened in Las Vegas, their families, as well as the Las Vegas community. Thank you. With that, I'll start off with the pledge. Walter, would you lead us, please?
Would you rise and join the mayor and council in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter. The first thing that I would like to do is I am going to read a proclamation on Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Whereas domestic violence violates an individual's dignity, security, and humanity and is a crime with sweeping effects on our community, safety, and health, and whereas survivors should have help to find the compassion and the healing they deserve, and perpetrators of violence should be held accountable for their actions. Whereas all residents of Moscow should feel safe and peace in their homes, and whereas our youth deserve information and education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent, and whereas Alternative Violence of the Palouse is committed to ending violence in our community through prevention education and has been providing services to those affected of violence for over 35 years. Whereas a local coalition of organizations exists directly to confront domestic violence, including law enforcement officers, victims, advocates, prosecutors, healthcare providers, faith leaders, and concerned Moscow residents. And whereas the City of Moscow is an important partner with ATVP's vision to create a community that is safe, equitable, and free from oppressions that lead to domestic violence. Now, therefore, I, Bill Lambert, Mayor of the City of Moscow, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2017 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. In the Moscow community, I urge all citizens to reflect and to honor victims and survivors of domestic violence in our community, and also use this month to take actions upon ending violence on the Palouse. With that, I do have a proclamation I will give, and Jill Crump was here to receive that. Jill, there you are back there. We've got a lot of folks here, so I've been looking around for you. Come on up, Jill. How are you doing
Let's do one more. As soon as it tells me I can.
Okay, we'll all talk for you, then, Jill. Go ahead and sit down for a second. Jill was given the opportunity to speak, ladies and gentlemen, but she doesn't have a voice. She's got a little bit of laryngitis from some of those things. Here it is, October, with a little bit of brisk air out there. A few of us have been under the weather. Thank goodness, knock on wood, I have not had that. But what I want to say about Alternatives to Violence, and it's something that I've been aware of for many, many years. When I served on United Way 35 years ago, they were one of the groups that came in, and we helped service them with monies and different things, and that's where I learned about Alternatives to Violence. And as a community, the only way we knock it out is to be shoulder by shoulder and never, ever give up and continue on. No matter what community you're in, you always have some of this, and so we need to work together, ladies and gentlemen, to make that happen. Anyway, Jill, get well quick, and thank you for being here with us this evening. Okay. With that, I'll move on to the next item. But before I do that, I will make an announcement. There will not be an executive session this evening for everybody that's here. With that, I'll move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Jim and a second by Art to approve the consent agenda, and I will start the roll with Walter.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We will move on to item number 2, which is staff recognition report. Gary, do you have anything for us this evening, sir?
No report this evening, sir.
Okay, mayor's appointments. I do have a bunch of them, ladies and gentlemen. Here they are. I've got 6 that I want to announce to the councilor for their approval. It'll go right down the line. I got Victoria Seaver, Planning and Zoning Commission, expiration in 12/31 of 2018. Sarah Zask, Parks and Rec Commission, expiration 12/31/2018. Susan Peterson, Parks and Rec Commission, expiration 12/31 of 2019. Carly Lilly, Sustainable Environment Commission, expiration 12/31 of 2017. Matthew Harden, Arts Commission, expiration 12/31 of 2020. And Jamie Hill, Farmers Market Commission, expiration 12/31 of 2018, and that is an at-large position. I would entertain a motion from our council.
I move we accept the appointments.
Second.
Of the commissions.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, we're going to let the 2 ladies win. Catherine made
They can
the
filled in.
motion to approve, and Gina second. I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay, now before I ask for all those folks to stand up, please stand up, because I know I've said Victoria's here, Susan's here,
Yeah.
Carly's here, Jamie as well, Matthew's here. Anybody else? I wanted to make sure. Okay, well, a couple of things I wanted to point out. First off, I'm going to start with Victoria Seavers. This lady here, there's nobody in this community that's more engaged than Victoria. She is at every single council meeting, every single public works and finance, every single admin, planning and zoning, and board of adjustment. And there should be some kind of and something else. And okay, you are as well. Yes, it's 7 a.m. on Thursday mornings. Anyway, she said, this lady deserves this. And it was my pleasure to tell her, I think you should do this. So I'm really tickled about that. So thank you so much, Victoria. And I want to make a comment about Carly Lilly here as well, because as I said, her expiration ends on 12/31 of 2017, which is, of course, this year. But look forward to January getting another stint, Carly, okay? Now, if any of you would like to speak, you're welcome to come up and tell us a little bit about yourselves if you want. You don't have to. It's up to you.
County? Or former clerk.
Victoria must have laryngitis, too.
Well, the good thing about the group that we have here, though, if they have something to say, they will, in fact, say it, and we'll know about it. So, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to public comment and mayor's response period. This is something we allow 15 minutes of time at each council meeting, as long as it's something that is not on tonight's agenda or in front of planning and zoning or in front of the board of adjustment. If you wish to speak, we'll give you 3 minutes. And at the end of 15 minutes, we'll move on. Please state your name and your address and what your concerns are.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Paul Kimmel, 1037 4 Mile Road, Viola, Idaho. I am co-founder of the Palouse Basin Water Summit. With me is my lovely assistant, John Kimberling. Yes, so he has some materials to hand out to you tonight, and we are here on behalf of our 2017 Palouse Basin Water Summit. Some of you attended our recent Inland Northwest Partners meeting up in Coeur d'Alene. Our keynote was Doug Griffiths, who wrote a book called 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. And it's really kind of a fun way to look at how to really not build a sustainability in your community. One of the chapters, the first chapter, in fact, was about water. And the title of this chapter was Forget the Water. So let me just read for you, if you would. And I timed this at 2 minutes and 58 seconds, Lori Lewis. Okay. We can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. We can survive without just about everything else. Our communities were founded at or near water. It is central to their existence. If you don't have enough water to feed your community, it can't grow or even sustain itself. We have seen the consequences of that situation as it has transpired across California. Quality of water is equally as critical to our success. People expect good quality water. We often take that for granted. Our water will be safe and clean, but it takes only a situation like Flint to remind us of what can happen when we aren't vigilant. Many people think the next world major conflict will be a fight over religion or oil, perhaps, but the last one will be fought over water, because whoever controls water controls everything. So with that, I want to cordially invite you to our Palouse Basin Water Summit. It's themed Imagine a Day Without Water. Our keynote is Patricia Mulroy. Patricia was a former manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, as well as the Las Vegas City Water Department. She's going to talk about ways to build resiliency and sustainability in our water supply. And I think it's critical at this point in our juncture. We have a recent study about water supply alternatives, and I think she will help us and keep us focused in the right direction as we continue to move toward that sustainability. I also want to thank you for your staff, for Nicole Baker, for Tyler Palmer. You guys are truly engaged in the conversation, support the summit as well as the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee. So again, with that, I stand for 20 seconds of questions.
Well, the Water Summit is very, very important. It is its way to engineering, their community building. And, you hit the nail on the head, Paul. We've been talking about this for a couple of decades now in our whole Palouse region, and now is the time for us really to take action and make something happen so that we do have a sustainable water source for the future and for future generations. One of the things I've always said as the mayor, don't wait until the problem happens and you turn the water faucet on or anything else and it doesn't work. Do something about it in advance. Don't kick the can down the road. Make it happen and go forward with it. So I appreciate the comments that you have brought forward to us. Council, questions for Paul? And or John. John, are you going to speak too, or are you just handing out you're the Vanna White of the show? So
Certainly Vanna tonight.
Okay, so thank you,
But the
John.
public is invited too. I mean, this is a community conversation that we have annually.
Yes.
We typically attract almost 300 people, but we need to continue that conversation. We have such a transient community with our universities, and it just requires us to be just diligent in that conversation.
Walter, you had it.
Paul, what was the date, time, and place again, please?
Thank you. October 19th at 4:30 at the Schweitzer Event Center in Pullman. It's free. We have appetizers and beverages and lots of great information. We're going to show you the latest geology. We're going to show you the latest studies we have. We'll do our pumping report, and again, we'll hear from Patricia.
Very good.
Thank you, Walter. That was a good prompt.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you for the work that you and John
Thank
do
you.
on that, and I will
All right.
be there for sure.
Thank you all.
Okay. Hi, Ken. Please, even though I know who you are, you got an name.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Kenton Bird, 517 East B in Moscow. I'm here this evening with 25 students from the School of Journalism and Mass Media at the University of Idaho. If I could ask the students to raise their hands so you know who they are. This is a field trip for our unit on local government. And what better way to see local government in action than to come to a city council meeting? The students will be following up tomorrow or Wednesday with questions to you or the city staff, either by phone or email. Thank you in advance for any courtesies that you extend to them, because who knows, one of them may be the next Garrett Cabeza or Josh Babcock or even the next Glenn Mosley. So thanks for your attention to helping them learn the ropes.
Thank you, Kenton. No, by the way, for all of you students or students of Kenton, him and I first met, neither one of us had a gray hair on our head. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there to you.
Hello, my name is Chris Norden. I, like Kenton, am a universally loved educator. Maybe not. But I live at 428 East 7th Street here in Moscow, longtime Moscow resident. I commute down to Lewiston to teach at Lewis Clark State College. I'm wearing my Native American Awareness Week t-shirt. I've been involved in that activity, at that annual tradition there for the 24 years that I've served at LCSC. I'd like to just briefly commend the council members, the incumbents who are running for re-election, for your participation in the University of Idaho Candidate Forum last week. This was a really important event. I think your commitment to genuine, robust procedural democracy is outstanding. And I think you already know this, but it's worth saying. If you can speak to and be understood by young people and motivate them to turn out and vote, this country remains a strong democracy. So thank you again.
Thank you, Chris, and you're absolutely right on that. We need everybody to vote. I know I talked to a number of students over the weekend, some that had not registered, and I'd encourage them to register. And one of the things I talk about on this election coming up for 2017, on these off-year elections, we have a lousy turnout, and we need more turnout, because that's what democracy is all about. Okay, is there others before we move on? Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 5, which is a Citizens Commission report, Park and Rec Commission. We got Dwight Curtis as well as Nancy Tribble, the chair of that. And you have 2 new members tonight, Nancy.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Bird for messing up my entire night. I thought everybody was here to see me.
Large crowd. Give him a hand, will you?
Well, I don't know why they wouldn't be here to see you, Dwight.
I'll tell you about that later.
We're waiting. Can we, let's move this blackboard that we never used. Let's get that out in the hallway so these other folks can come in and line up on this wall over here. Can we do that, Bill? Would you do that, please? Just to kind of get it out of the way. That way we can get some more folks that are in the doorway so they... Oh, by the way, while we're waiting and this is happening, it's great to have a whole audience here today. This is terrific. And we have had a number of folks of late, so that's good. So, okay, Dwight, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. And as we do every year, we give you an annual report of what's been going on with the city's Parks and Recreation Department, as well as what's coming up. And with that, I'd like to introduce our chair, Nancy Tribble.
Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council members. Our picture on the front page are the participants of last year's first Cops and Robbers Fun Run, so which is coming up. I would encourage you all to get involved and walk or run or skip or hop, whatever you'd like to do. These are our members. We have Justin Minden from 2014. I've been on the commission since 2009. Damon Burton. We have Susan Steele, Susan Peterson, who is a new member, Ted Kishaw. We have Robbie Cooper, Sarah Zaski, and Mark Heinlein. Our Parks and Commission mission statement is, this department, in partnership with our citizens, enriches Moscow's quality of life by providing well-designed and properly maintained parks and recreational opportunities for all citizens. Services include the development and maintenance of parks and community forestry, recreational sports facilities, aquatics, playgrounds, trails, open spaces, and city office buildings, in addition to offering a vast array of individual and group recreation programs. What's been happening? Well, as we all know, the exciting opening of May 17th of our downtown public restrooms in Friendship Square, and I'd like to thank the entire community and the City Council for support on that. Thank you. We are continuing to review and recommend for official name of Morgan's Orchard Park, the renewal of Phillips Farm lease agreement to Latah County, Moscow Charter School and the use of the Herc Center. We participated in annual Parks and the Facilities tour, and we're always exploring for the suitable site for another community garden. That's one of our goals. Our other community garden has done so well. We're looking for one on another part of in Moscow. Man and information table at the farmers market, and the Palouse Prairie School is on hold as far as pathways because I believe they're continuing to look for a new location. Reviewed and supported staff proposal for Moscow's first pickleball court, which is located in Mountain View Park. I encourage you to go play if you haven't. We're continuing review and recommendation for playground equipment for Indian Hills Park and council consideration. The construction is currently underway as I speak. We've changed the name from Blackbird Crossing to Blackbird Station. The staff with the proposal to phase development of the Mountain View Park Horseshoe Courts facility. We continue to host an information table at Farmers Market. And we're currently exploring the feasibility of a Parks and Recreation Foundation as ongoing monitoring to the off-leash area for Mountain View Park for all of our dog lovers. Any questions or thoughts on what I've talked so far?
Questions for Nancy. Walter.
Yes.
Nancy, a while back, y'all were involved in the last item on that bullet list in terms of having apparently received some comments or complaints about the off-leash area.
Yes.
What's the recent story?
We've continued to work with the folks that are very active in taking their dogs to continue monitoring. It's just been cleanup. There was concern that the cleanup after the dogs would not happen, and so we've tried to keep a very open and approachable atmosphere at our commission meetings, and we've encouraged people, if they're still finding that an issue, to please bring it to us. And we do have signs that talk about cleanup afterwards.
I'll make one I want to make one comment on that, Nancy. I spoke to a lady 2 weeks ago, and there was herself and a group of others that went out there and did a bang-up job on cleaning it up. And she told me one of the problems that surfaced actually after school started this year. So that's something that we need to get out to these university students. And we got a whole journalism class here that could be great to get the word out on campus about that, because that's a part for everyone out there. So
yes, it is.
Just thought I'd throw that out there. Walter, I'll go back to you.
So do you feel it's better than it was, or about the same or worse, or can you tell?
We haven't heard any additional negative responses since it first started, so that's really the only way we're going to be able to monitor is have our citizens come to us. As of now, I'm going to say it's better, but we are certainly open and would like to address it if it's not.
I have a question for Nancy.
Jim.
Yes.
Nancy, we're in a new fiscal year now, and as of today, we'll be refunding people who donated money for the bike pedestrian bridge on 3rd Street.
Okay.
They'll be getting a refund, and I've kind of advanced the idea with Dwight that maybe we could approach those people about maybe transferring that donation to the Blackbird Station so we could finish that project. If that's something you haven't been able to consider, that we're able to do so now because we're in the new year and those funds will become available.
Those would be much appreciated to continue the development of the Blackbird Station. Thank you very much, Jen.
Well, thank you, Nancy, and as always, our commissions always do a wonderful job. And
Thank you. Oh, I have a couple more here, too.
well, I thought you were ending this, so I
wanted to give you an opportunity to, I didn't want to just rush it through. I wanted you to definitely ask any questions. So this is the pad for the safety tiles for the Indian Hills Park Playground. We're very excited to get this underway. And here's the pathway to the playground, which is under construction. And just our upcoming for 2018 issues and projects, we will be continuing the implementation of the 2013 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as well as the development for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update for 2019. We will continue with our annual report on the Youth Scholarship Program, of course, open for any recommendations. Updates to the City Parks and Facilities Historical Guide continues, as well as the playground equipment for Itani and Milton Arthur Park development. Hopefully, we'd like to look at a possible future dog park. As we're such a dog-friendly community, and our existing dog park just gets worn out. I know people would like to see another one, as well as a possible future edible forest, and continue the feasibility for Parks and Recreation Foundation. Any additional questions?
Now, one thing I will say, parks and all the different things we're doing in parks, is a continued effort. We just keep moving forward and keep moving forward and keep moving forward. And that's how we have to do it in order to achieve where we're going. And we're making great progress.
Well, it's really a team effort, and we appreciate all the input and your commitment.
Absolutely.
To our commission. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy, very much. Thank you, Dwight. Ladies and gentlemen, being as I have a journalism class, I can't hardly pass this up. The thing of it is, we've got a number of commissions that do wonderful work, and this is just one of the many, many volunteers that come and serve in our city, which we need. And we're a very fortunate city to have all the talent that we do. Okay, with that, I will move on to consideration and resolution declaring Indigenous Peoples Day. Gary Reeder, you will have the podium, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're here tonight pursuant to a request from the Moscow Human Rights Commission that the City Council proclaim Columbus Day be changed to Indigenous Peoples Day for the City of Moscow. So we've got a little bit of history on that, as well as the effect within the City of Moscow. You have in your packet a resolution, a draft resolution for council consideration, which in fact does name the second Monday, the day of the federally recognized Columbus Day, State of Idaho Columbus Day, as Indigenous Peoples Day in the City of Moscow. However, there is some background that we want to make the council aware. Obviously, the City Council may designate city holidays. The federal government, the state government does that by statute or recognition of federal holidays. As I said, the federal government has recognized October 9th as Columbus Day, celebrated on the second Monday in October. The state government does the same thing. In the City of Moscow, there is only one instance that we can find that the City of Moscow ever officially recognized Columbus Day, and that was on October 2nd, 1978, when then Mayor Don Mackin requested that the council establish whether Columbus Day on October 9th, 1978, specifically that date, should be considered as a city legal holiday. City Council voted 3-2 to observe October 9th, 78 as a legal holiday for the City of Moscow. Previous to that, the earliest thing we could find was in 1975. The council unanimously granted a holiday to all city employees in lieu of Columbus Day on the Friday following Thanksgiving. In 1982, October 4th of 1982, the City Council accepted the resignation of the Administrative Committee, quote, in light of the fact that several years ago the city authorized the trading of Columbus Day for the following day following Thanksgiving. The committee does not support reinstating Columbus Day as a holiday. And then at various times throughout the years, the council has, by resolution, approved the city's personnel policies, which is the only city recognition of holidays recognized by the city. And you'll note that both in the federal and state governments, the designation of a holiday means that government operations are suspended for that day, offices are closed, and employees of those governments are granted the day off with pay. The City of Moscow recognizes 11 total holidays. Those would be New Year's Day, Idaho Human Rights Day, President's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving Day, the day following Thanksgiving, and it states in the personnel policy parenthetically a substitute for Columbus Day, then Christmas Day. A personal floating holiday is also granted, and other holidays may be declared by the mayor and city council, which is one of the reasons we're here today. Again, the request from the Human Rights Commission is a little bit problematic as far as the city is concerned. We have 11 paid holidays. The personnel policy states that those holidays that are declared by the city, those that are listed, and others declared by the mayor and city council, result in closure of city hall offices. Also grant 8 hours of paid leave to employees on that date. So the council has a couple of choices. One is to do nothing, as Columbus Day is not recognized by the city at this time. Certainly the city could, by petition or action of the mayor and or council, petition the state and federal government to designate the Columbus Day holiday, what is known now as the Columbus Day holiday, to Indigenous Peoples Day. Council could declare an additional city holiday in conformance with the personnel policy. The council could declare a holiday that is not recognized by the personnel policy, which the resolution that you have before you does just that. Did not feel that it was the direction of the city council to grant an additional day off to city employees, as well as close city hall offices for an additional working day. So the resolution that you have in your packets declares that the city holiday specifically does not authorize the closure of city offices and specifically does not grant employees an additional day off. So with that, I would submit that for council consideration.
Okay, Gary, before we get into council deliberations on this, I am going to take some input from the public on this. I would like to speak for a few minutes, one way or the other, whether you believe in this, whether you don't believe in it. But what I'd like to do is state your name and address, and we'll give you a couple of minutes. And I know Ken Fonce is here from our Human Rights Commission. Ken, I'd actually like to hear from you first, and then we'll go from there. How's that sound?
So thank you, Mayor, City Council. My name is Ken Fonce, 1111 East 1st Street in Moscow, and I'm the chair of the Moscow Human Rights Commission. And so first I want to apologize to the council members that you did not get all of the information that was sent out, so that you were missing things, and I want to apologize for that. There was a lack of communication there. And so I'm hoping that you eventually got everything that you were supposed to get. And so also I wanted to submit to you a petition supporting the change of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day with 269 signatures. Okay. And so I'd like that to go into the record. And so the Moscow Human Rights Commission unanimously and very strongly supports the change of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And as part of what we were doing, we realized that the city does not recognize Columbus Day as an official holiday, even though the state and federal government does, with days off and closures. And so what we wanted was the name change in Moscow not affecting the operations of the city. So it's more the symbol of the name change than the actual making it a city holiday in that sense, because we already don't have that city holiday. And so just a few words on that, on support. First of all, the symbol of Columbus Day. It is a symbol to a lot of people, especially Native American groups in the United States, of genocide, slavery, conquest, and all of these things that go along with it. And so it's a continuous yearly symbol of everything that was experienced. And so we argue that it should be changed. The symbol should be changed, not to erase the past, but to recognize that the indigenous people of the United States and Native Americans were the first human inhabitants to this region. Moscow is on Native American land. It was built on that, the Palouse. And so that we honor the Native Americans and their ancestors and recognize that what happened, and while we cannot change the past, we can make people aware of that past, make it evident of it, and try to move forward beyond that past by recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day. Another part of this is also that Columbus himself should not be on a holiday, and I totally support changing the state and federal holiday on that. That's a bit beyond my scope, but I would love to help somebody work on that because Columbus himself was a mass murderer. a slaver, abused and tortured people. He sold children as young as 10 years old into sexual slavery on a regular basis, was removed from his office, put on trial, and found guilty of atrocities. At the last minute, he was pardoned by the King of Spain and saved life in prison or execution on that. And so I don't think we should have a holiday in any way, shape, or form honoring someone of that nature, let alone the symbolic issue of the genocide, the conquest, and everything else that goes with it. And I think it is important to honor the Native Americans and the first inhabitants of this area by recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day. A lot of other cities and locations have already done this for their cities. Some actually made it a full holiday and a day off. Others did not. It just depended on what the cities already had. The University of Idaho has already done this. And we would be the first city in Idaho to make this change, even though Boise State University and the University of Idaho has already made it as universities, and so they do not recognize Columbus Day. And so I just want to state that and stress that we make this change, and that hopefully you will vote to make this change, because it is the right thing to do. And so we believe strongly that it is. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. You're raising your hand. Come on up here and tell us who you are, sir, your address, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to speak.
Thank you. My name is Caleb Bauma. I live at 463 Boyd Avenue in Moscow, Idaho. And I just have a couple of minutes of comments here. I grew up here. I've been here since 5th grade. I now raise my kids here. And my great-grandmother was half Cherokee. So I can sympathize with that side, but that being said, this proposal is concerning to me in that it's proposed as a way to celebrate such diversity with a holiday, which is inclusive rather than divisive. When this resolution would inherently force the majority of residents to choose between commemorating how they personally got here and remembering those who were here first. There are 365 days in the year, and it is something far from inclusive to try to replace, insofar as it would replace, Columbus Day, regardless of whether there is some disagreement over it. If I were eating at a large table with several people and many open chairs, and it would hardly be inclusive of me to remove one of those 3 people from their seat so that I could put someone whom I thought more worthy of in their chair. Inclusion means inviting someone to pull up a chair, and if you happen to disagree, you dialogue about it. You don't replace. This will immediately divide people into camps simply by replacing one of the longest standing actually, commemorations from the slate. Whether you like it or not, most of us are where we are, in part because of Columbus, because he sailed the ocean blue. Commemorating a significant historical figure does not mean that you condone all their actions or their beliefs. We must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Even with all of his life's flaws, Columbus impacted the world in a gigantic way, marking the beginning of written, recorded history of America, and the beginning of the exchange between European and American culture. His discovery, I believe, is worth remembering simply because it is one of the most significant events in the recorded history of America. Renaming a long-standing holiday is a bad idea, I believe, in itself, because it erases our history, and the way that we're doing it here is not inclusive. Why not add a holiday near Columbus Day to acknowledge the true diversity of our heritage? Sure, he murdered people, he did horrible things. Part of our commemoration, in tandem with, side by side with Indigenous Peoples Day, can be commemorating the complexity of our history.
Kayla, would you wrap it up, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
So I would propose that we declare a different day that is not recognized as a personal holiday as Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Victoria Seaver, 121 North Lily, Moscow. I figured you'd let us say something, so I prepared a statement. Both the man and the European colonial conquest that Columbus Day symbolizes is a persistent, terrible stain on our history, which we know is not always exemplary. The ethics we strive for today, albeit imperfectly, challenges us to live up to our highest ideals much better. Here we have an opportunity to redress a wrong. Webster's definition of redress includes to set right, to remove the cause of grievance and complaint, relief from distress. If we could transport ourselves back to those early days and experience in the flesh and the soul that conquest exacted upon the continental American peoples, we would be overwhelmed with deep sorrow and compassion. Today, we ask, is there something we can do now? A simple but significant act would be to change this name to Indigenous Peoples Day, to shift the focus to where Native Americans can bring their culture and pride to this day. It is a step toward honoring them in their own right. It is a step in acknowledging the reality of the past and redirecting our actions more honorably. Can we please stand forward and resolve to make this Indigenous Peoples Day?
Thank you, Victoria. Come on up. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Heike Jenert, and I live at 1529 North Polk Extension, Moscow, Idaho. This is my first time ever at this Moscow City Council meeting, and I'm nervous. So I'm here in support of keeping just the way it is, and Columbus Day recognizes the achievements of a great Renaissance explorer who founded the first permanent European settlement in New York. The arrival of Columbus in 1492 marks the beginning of recorded history in America. Columbus Day celebrates the beginning of cultural exchange between America and Europe. After Columbus came millions of European immigrants who brought their art, music, science, medicine, philosophy, and religious principles to America. These contributions have helped shape the United States, including Greek democracy, Roman law, Judeo-Christian ethics, and the tenet that all men are created equal. Columbus Day is one of America's oldest holidays. The tradition of observing Columbus Day dates back to the 18th century. It was first celebrated on October 12, 1792, when the New York Society of Etemini honored Columbus on the 300th anniversary of his first voyage. Columbus Day is a patriotic holiday. In fact, the Pledge of the Legion was written in 1892 in honor of the 400th anniversary of his first voyage. That year, President Benjamin Harrison declared Columbus Day a legal holiday. The United States has long admired Columbus. America has more monuments to Columbus than any nation in the world, according to the Christopher Columbus Encyclopedia. These include a Columbus statue in Providence, RI, cast by Frederick August Bertholdi, who created the Statue of Liberty, and one in New York City created by one of the 6 Italian-American brothers who carved the Lincoln Memorial. The United States has a significant collection of Columbus memorabilia, including his desk papers and the cross he used to claim the New York world for Spain. These are in the Columbus chapter of somewhere in Pennsylvania. In 1971, Columbus Day became a federal holiday in all 50 states after Congress passed a law declaring the second Monday in October Columbus Day. Columbus Day also commemorates the arrival of these shores of more than 5 million Italians a century ago. Today, their children and grandchildren constitute the nation's 5th largest ethnic group, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. I do want to say something real quick, and this might be offensive to some people. When I heard on Friday that we are going to change a holiday, my first thought, I was born and raised in Germany, I thought about the book burning in 1993 in Germany, where, very, very bad people in Germany, the Nazis, where they tried to erase Jewish intellectual property from their German institutions. They tried to erase history. And I don't want this to happen to this country. I don't want our history to be erased.
Okay.
I want us to add maybe another holiday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Hey. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell you what, let's just keep this. There's folks in here that are for it. There's folks in here that are not for it. So let's let everybody chat, talk about their point of view, and let's don't have any more clapping on one way or the other, okay? That way it's civil for everybody, and that just keeps emotions down. I love it, the fact that we've got a lot of folks in here, so I'll listen to the next person. Walter, you?
Mayor, could I ask that, we've got people in here on both sides. Could we have the signs put down, please? We've read them. We understand. We appreciate it.
Yep.
You went to some trouble. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And if you turn those two right there over, please. We've got people on both sides. Thank you all very much.
Come on up.
We're listening to all of you.
Yep. Come on up, whoever wants to speak. Come right over here, sir, at the podium, and state your name, your address, and let us know what's on your mind.
Okay, I think of this. Okay, well, the name is like Michael Moldenhauer. It's from 803 North Main Street in Moscow here. And the thing I want to say was that I've argued, so first of all, if maybe I won't, I've trouble with this kind of just talking here. It's kind of difficult. I have a certain mental problems that makes it difficult sometimes, but I'm going to try and say, what I want to say is that the thing that I was thinking was I was going to offer a comment, not to well, personally I know what I personally would side with, but I'm not here to offer just another side. I was here to offer a comment. Someone mentioned earlier about how it's a complex thing. And I'd suggest then that if you want to say it's complex, but then they argue, well, you should still keep the thing to celebrate it. It's still basically saying that one is to be celebrated, the other is to be celebrated. But it's like, I don't know. I don't think you can. To me, since if you say to keep the thing and celebrate Columbus, whatever, it's like there isn't really a what you call it? It's because there it's like to say that to me that when he fantasy did go and kill a lot of people. So if you say he is to be celebrated, it's like you ignore that it started a long historical pattern. Yes, it's created writing, yes, but they did also kill. They did also kill a lot of people. When he first came there, he did go and he had in his ships. He had people in there who he brought with him he would go to the islands and he'd have them rape. That was what they did, and that's his own logs. That's what they had in there, and that's so he was already on it. But the point is that because it's a complicated thing, if you just say if you have a day just to celebrate, it's not sure what to say. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem right to me, I guess, to have a day. So if you say you shouldn't have a day to celebrate the other, maybe you should just not have either. I'm just saying, it should.
Michael, I got a question to ask you.
Yeah.
So your point of view is you should not have either one of them? Is that what you're telling us? Or?
No. Personally, I'd prefer the other, but I just prefer having the indigenous peoples thing just because of honor. So he was wrong because it makes more sense as a redress, so they said. But at the same time, but on the other hand, from a more broad point of view or whatever, I guess that it would be like that there's, I think.
Okay, Mike, I'm gonna
Thanks.
go ahead and cut you off. Thank you for your point of view. I think we all got you. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Michael. Yeah. Hold applause.
Mr. Mayor, Council, Jonathan Graydon, 116 South Jackson Street, Apartment 2. I work at the Appaloosa Horse Club, which is the breed registry for the Appaloosa horse, the Nez Perce horse, the spotted horse used by the local tribes in this region. And so as somebody who works there and has become familiar with the history of the Chief Joseph War Trail, some of the pressures and atrocities committed by the U.S. Army on natives throughout that history, I very much support Indigenous Peoples Day. I think it's a very good thing locally because we have such a great history here of Native peoples and rich history, which includes culture and art and everything else. And just a quick comment, there are several states right now who do not recognize Columbus Day as an official holiday. Some of them recognize it as alternative days. Hawaii recognizes Discoverers Day for the Polynesian discoverers. Vermont recognizes Indigenous Peoples Day. And I believe this will be a great thing for Idaho as well, and Moscow specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yep, folks, this is...
Good evening. My name is Juliana Repp, and I live in Spokane, Washington. I don't live here in Moscow, but I'm...
Can you give us your address in Spokane? Then?
Yes, it's 4205 North Marengo Drive, Spokane, 99212.
Okay, thank you.
I'm speaking today as a Nez Perce tribal member. I'm a member of the tribe. My brother's here. He's also a member of the tribe. So as a member of the indigenous people from this area who lived here long before Moscow was built, I came here tonight to support and to voice my comments that the City Council and the Mayor consider changing the name to Indigenous Peoples Day to rid the city of, or the holiday, I guess it's not really fully celebrated as a holiday, but to change it from the name of a racist individual who committed cultural genocide, and that's already been spoken to somewhat by the human, I can't remember his name, is it Mr. Fonts or
yep,
Mr. Fonts? Yes. So I'm just asking the City Council to have you stand on the right side of history and change this name to Indigenous Peoples Day. This would follow a long line of cities. There's over 50 cities, 50-plus cities across the United States, including Spokane, Washington. We changed the name last year in 2016. Portland, Oregon has changed the name, Seattle, Washington, and so there's many cities that set a precedent to change the name of this offensive individuals, Columbus. I want to also go over a little bit of history, too. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. I admit I haven't seen the resolution, but I want to go ahead and just mention that the basis for a lot of the changes that came in Seattle and in Spokane originated with a proposal in 1977. And that was first, that was an Indigenous Peoples Day, when Indigenous Peoples Day, was first proposed by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations sponsored, when they sponsored an international conference on discrimination against indigenous populations in the Americas. So way back in 1977, this change was being worked on and considered. And then again in 2011, I'm not sure if you've seen the resolution, but the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, who represent 59 tribes from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Northern California, Western Montana, and some Alaskan tribes, passed resolution number 11-57 to support changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And so I'm requesting, just respectfully requesting that you consider the people such as my ancestors and many other indigenous peoples from this area to change the offensive name of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for joining us here. Folks.
I'd just like to say one thing.
Your name and address, sir.
My name is Devin Rydeen. I live at 103 North California Street, Garfield, Washington. I agree with both sides of this. Like, it's really hard to decide. When I think her name was Heidi Gina, I couldn't understand because of her accent. But I agree that it is our history. And if we are going to change the name, and it just to support both sides, you could change it to Columbian Exchange Day, not Columbus Day. Yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
Thanks for that good point of view, young man.
Mayor,
Thank you.
Mayor, could
Yes.
he go over to Laurie and give her his name spelling? I think she had trouble getting it.
Did you get that, Laurie?
Would you just go over and spell your name to her, please? Thank you.
Who's Devin?
Good evening. My name is Sandra Kelly. I'm at 517 North Garfield Street in lovely Moscow, Idaho. Love being a Moscowite. I've been here for 10 years, and I've always taken great pride in being here. Take great pride in the chance we have this opportunity to actually talk to the city councilman, so thank you for that. The sign I turned around that I was grateful to hold up says, "It's time to do the right thing." And I really, truly believe it is time to do the right thing. We have a long history. It's a complicated history. We're not changing history. I think we're trying to do the right thing and put the right part of history. It's time to call it Indigenous Peoples Day. This is Indigenous Peoples land. Thankful to be here. Thankful for my ancestors that settled here in Pierce, Idaho. I'm a sixth-generation Idahoan, and I'm proud of that fact. I wouldn't have mentioned it if I weren't proud. But I also know that it's time to remember the people that were here first. It wasn't Columbus. It was our Indigenous friends. I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for those who have spoken tonight. And really, let's just do the right thing. It's time to change it. It's time to put Moscow, keep Moscow on the map as being the first city. Proud to be Moscow. Let's lead the way in Idaho. Thankful to the University of Idaho and even Boise State for taking the first step in this position. Never thought I'd say that, I have to admit. But I am. And so let's follow on that pathway and let's let Moscow lead the way in doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Folks. Okay, folks, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over for discussion for our council now. So, with that, Walter, would you?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The point has been made a couple of times. Gary made it, and then Ken possibly. We got a lot of emails on this from people, and they didn't understand that there, is not an observed Columbus Day in Moscow. So we're really not talking about changing something because it doesn't really exist in the first place. I have a little problem sometimes with dealing with things that I don't consider to really be in the purview of city councils. We're really about water, sewer, streets, potholes, airports, police departments, fire departments, and those kinds of things. And when we slip over into some of the social issues, I'll admit it makes me a little uncomfortable. We've done it before. We've done it quite successfully. And we've done things that the rest of the state hasn't done. But with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd entertain hearing from other council people, and then probably have a couple of questions later.
Okay. Jim.
Mr. Mayor, I fully expect this to pass. And I don't have a problem with designating the federal holiday day as some other name besides Columbus Day, but I kind of have a problem with the name Indigenous People Day because I think it's not very inclusive. And it's not because I'm against Indigenous people or Native Americans. It's because I'm for them, and I'm for LGBT people, and I'm for Syrian refugees and Latino Americans and African Americans and any other people that came here in search of freedom and equality. So I would prefer that the name be something else, but this is possibly a step in that direction. So that's my opinion on it.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Art?
Yeah, I'm strongly in support of changing this name and altering the focus and the emphasis from a bit of history headed up initially by Christopher Columbus himself, genocide, slavery, and a lot of other unpleasantries. Change it from the negative that is associated with that individual, and also the fact that he never really landed on North America. He's hung around the Dominican Republic only, I believe. But I'd like to see it changed and put the focus back onto the indigenous peoples who were here and make this a commemoration on the second Monday in October for Moscow to reflect and think about the indigenous peoples who were here and what happened to them and how they are still with us and socially relevant to this day.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at this, and my mind really has been changed since we spent the amount of time, and I've spent time just talking to people up and down Main Street. And Jim, I agree with you, this might just be the first step. And if it is, that's fine. The number of people that took the time out of their evening to come in to the city council chambers where usually we just do dull stuff. Am I wrong? And so what we're doing here is we're taking the first step. I don't like the name Indigenous at all, but I'm going to vote for this because we're starting down a path that could be really good. And we're early enough in the process that if it is not good, we can change it. So I'm going to go in favor of passing, this isn't legislation, but passing this. And I want to thank all of you folks that came out and all of you folks on the other side that came out. And in this meeting, being against it puts you right behind the 8 ball. So, like I said, I thank you.
Catherine?
Hi, thank you all for coming very much, and we've had some good conversations at this. I was really surprised at how much dialogue we've had about it, and I think what was first off kind of weird is it felt like we were being attacked when, I mean, as a council, when we didn't bring it up. So I'm glad it came from the commission, but I feel like it is a dialogue that we've been open to, and I think the important word is ancestors, and I think that's what's resonating with both sides is ancestors. And it looks to be that the United Nations, again, is the people that moved this forward first, and that's where I go back to, 1977 with the real move. And then it looks like in 1992, about, 25 years ago, when we really began to think about indigenous people. And Jim and I and the mayor have had big conversations about this because reconciliation is really what we all want. We want to move forward and heal. But it seems like our first step is to acknowledge, especially with the state of Idaho and with our federal government, that indigenous people need to be seen, and maybe they're not being seen. So as much as I would like for it to be a reconciliation day, it seems as though we're not there yet. So I think we'll have to do this as a first step. But that part of the resolution, part 3, I would really encourage the Human Rights Commission to be strong and continue to push this forward. And if you really want to be first, and if you really want to do the right thing, continue the energy toward the national government.
Gina.
Every one of you right now with the passion and the willingness to sit in those uncomfortable chairs for the amount of time you've been in them is why Moscow is a leader and why we are a great, quirky, fun, passionate group of people. I don't know if it's Indigenous, if it's Discovery Day, whatever it is, I'm in favor of changing it. Let's move forward. You got a work to do, Mr. Founts. You need to get the right wording and the right title for us, sir. Bring it forward as a suggestion, please.
Walter.
Gina, there's a little bit of a problem with that. The one before says Indigenous Peoples Day. So
I would support changing this as a first step, definitely.
Okay, I'm just a little puzzled about
What?
Pardon me?
He wants to know a name. What do you want to name?
I mean,
that's what he asked.
I understand you asking the Human Rights Commission working on a different name. We've had a couple of council people that have indicated a problem with the term that's being used. You may or may not. I'm not sure how we can pass this and then have them work on, do we go back and pass another one that changes the name again? That's all I'm asking.
What my point is that I think there are a number of us up here that agree that this is a good first step towards redress or reconciliation. I think Indigenous Peoples Day is fine. Period. And I would like to make a motion, my friend, that, and I want to get the right wording.
You're going to do the motion?
Yes, I'm going to do the motion. Thank you very much, Catherine. I would make a motion that we approve the attached resolution declaring Indigenous Peoples Day in the city of Moscow, stating the effect of such declaration and petitioning the federal and state governments to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day.
I'd second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Gina and a second by Art to approve the attached resolution declaring Indigenous Peoples Day in the city of Moscow, stating that the effect of such declaration and petitioning the federal and state governments to recognize Indigenous People Day. Further discussion before I call a roll. Start with you, Walter.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
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 Okay, it passes 5-1, so we do have an Indigenous Peoples Day, and as usual, the city of Moscow is leading, just like the University of Idaho, flagship university of the state. We are examples there, folks. There you go. Thank you. Resolution.
We would invite you all to stay and suffer through the rest of this with us.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, well, we are going to move on, ladies and gentlemen, to our number 7, 3rd Street Bridge corridor presentation by Les. Should we take a recess? 3-minute recess, ladies and gentlemen. Let everybody regroup. Stretch. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start again. Item number 7, 3rd Street Bridge Corridor presentation. Whoop, one more lady wanting out there.
Let him escape.
We let nobody out. We're shutting the door so nobody else can leave. So we're going to talk about our 3rd Street Bridge presentation. And Les McDonald will get this thing started for us here. Good evening, Les.
Good evening. Well, I have also been afflicted by the throat pain over the last week or so hopefully I'll make it through this without growling at you too much. Might take a sip of tea along the way, just in case. Okay, before you this evening is a kind of a report, a status update on where we are on the 3rd Street Bridge and 3rd Street Corridor. I was requested to bring this forward to the council tonight just to really try to, set the stage for what has gone in the past, where we are today, and where we are heading with the 3rd Street Corridor as a whole. I know there's been a lot of discussion here at council in the past. There's been a lot of discussion out there in the community about 3rd Street and the corridor and the bridge that is coming. And so the idea here is to kind of follow up on some of the information that's in your packet. There's a report in your packet that details all of this and a lot of other bits of information on the history and detail of the entire corridor and the question of the 3rd Street Bridge. But tonight I want to take a little bit of time to just really kind of talk through how we got here a little bit and then where we are going into the future. So we'll talk a little bit with the history, and I do want to thank Jen Piffner. She was here. She's around, who helped put this slideshow together and pull together some of the history as well. This goes back to 1994 to present. I can say that the history actually goes much further back than that, clear back into the 70s, with some of the earliest discussions about a 3rd Street corridor and a 3rd Street bridge. But to start talking a little bit about some of the council discussions, there's been some concern about there that the current project that was included in the fiscal year 18 city budget, which started yesterday, October 1st, that budget included a project funding for 3rd Street Bridge, and that was kind of sudden. So this section is to really talk a little bit about some of the history and the opportunity that there has been for discussions about this bridge over the course of the years. So really starting back in about 1994, the council started talking about this in a series of goals and mission statements that the council was doing. At that time, they were doing annual goals and missions pretty much all the way up until about 3 years ago. In that particular year, 1994, one of the projects identified was to improve arterials and specifically the inclusion of a bridge on 3rd Street across Paradise Creek. In 1997, they took it up again in a resolution, 9707, that addressed certain sections of the comprehensive plan. This is the land use plan, and within that plan there are mobility sections, mobility chapters that address connectivity and east-west flow, and the corridor came into the picture again. In 2005, moving forward a few years, there was some discussion about setting up a public meeting regarding the 3rd Street Bridge, which then did occur as a public workshop in October of 2005. So right here in this room, discussion with the City Council about the idea of constructing a bridge and what its history was at that point and the possibility of moving it forward. It did not move forward in the form of a vehicular bridge at that time. In 2007, a couple of years later, the council that was seated at that point passed a resolution, 2007-30, that really put a favor towards a pedestrian and bicycle bridge, a non-vehicular structure at that point. That resolution also authorized the city to accept donations for construction of a bridge. If you'll recall, those that were around, there was a lot of discussion about a citizen initiative to fund a pedestrian bridge to get it constructed. It would not be funded by the city as part of that package. In the course of the next couple of years, the city did receive about $7,700 in donations towards a pedestrian, non-vehicular structure. That series of donations ended in about 2008 was the last time we received donations, and it's been sitting there ever since. Most recently, the council has addressed that issue of those donations in August of 2017 in recognition of the 2018 budget, including a vehicular bridge or multimodal bridge, that the council authorized the refund of those donations that are still on the books. A couple years after that, December 2009, another resolution came through adopting an update to the City of Moscow Comprehensive Plan. This was I think the most current comprehensive plan, as I recall, and it did include, again, a mobility chapter that addressed east-west corridors within the community. In April of 2010, the council again set a city goal to improve east-west traffic flow and street connectivity throughout the community, but also specifically to include the 3rd Street Bridge as a way to complete the 3rd Street corridor and enhance that east-west connectivity. August 2010, there was some discussion about a traffic study occurring with regard to 3rd Street Bridge. If I recall, this was during the public comment period with the City Council meeting. Desire to request that a study occur to see what the impacts or potential impacts of a bridge could be. The council then responded at the following meeting on the 16th of August, talking about that very issue again. And then in October of 2011, the first of the discussions regarding a multimodal transportation plan came forward to the council. This was a transportation plan that was intended to address all modes of transportation within the community, so bicycles, pedestrians, cars, buses, all types. Even has a little bit on airports, believe it or not. And it was the first step in hiring a consultant to prepare a multimodal plan for the city. The next step was the actual approval of the consultant agreement, with the idea that this plan would be developed with a lot of public input, a lot of consideration to all modes of transportation and all the needs throughout the community. November of 11, Paradise Path Task Force, that was their name at the time, now the Moscow Pathway Commission, made a presentation to the council about the task force project priorities. And then the follow-up on the end of the transportation plan process in October of 2014, the City Council adopted the plan. That plan does include the 3rd Street Bridge as a recommended alternative, as a vehicular bridge, multimodal bridge, with traffic calming included within the corridor. And in 2015, February, Transportation Commission gave a report to City Council on some of their activities. This included looking at east-west corridors, 3rd Street Bridge, again, coming up in that discussion. And that takes us through the council's activities through that time frame, touching on Transportation Commission as well through some of that period. They started discussions on the 3rd Street and the potential of a bridge back in 2000, and at that point they were focusing a bit also on potential impacts on B Street, recognizing that without a bridge there's more flow going to B. If a bridge was installed at some point, perhaps that number would decrease. In 2005, with the thought that the council was considering the possibility of a vehicular bridge or multimodal bridge on 3rd Street, the Transportation Commission started talking about, well, what could be done to address changes in traffic patterns that might occur with the construction of a bridge. So at that point, they were discussing traffic calming measures along the corridor if a bridge was indeed installed. They also picked this up again in June of 2005 when they started talking about other issues related to not just traffic calming, but surrounding issues that might come into play. For instance, the sidewalk system is not complete along the 3rd Street corridor. Should it be? There are some lots that don't have sidewalks today, and at that time, what happens with east-west traffic flow in general across the city, how are pedestrians addressed, what street widths should be involved, what happens to parking that's out there, how does a bridge get funded, how do other improvements get funded. Those types of discussions were occurring back in 2005. The Transportation Commission took up 3rd Street again when we were talking about classification of streets, and this is the classification of local, a collector, minor arterial, principal arterial, and in 2007. Carried on those discussions again in 2008, whether it should be a collector or a minor arterial. And this has been an item that's been discussed a lot in the community about what should the classification of this street be. In February of 2014, the city was looking at an update to its urban area and functional classification map. This is the map that designates the official classifications of city streets throughout the community. And we'll come back to this again in a little bit, but at that time that update was proposed, presented to the Transportation Commission, and they supported the proposed changes within the plan, the update, that included 3rd Street as a minor arterial class street from Washington to Mountain View Road. And then in October of 2015, a discussion around the 3rd Street Bridge came up again, and at that point there were enough new members on the commission that the discussion primarily revolved around what was the history of this decade of discussion, past discussions that the commission had had regarding 3rd Street, the bridge, and the corridor and street classifications. So the multimodal transportation plan, we talked about a little bit earlier that the council had seen it on a couple of occasions and eventually adopted it. The intent of that plan was to really create a system-wide concept for how transportation could be handled throughout the community. Again, all modes, pedestrian, bicycles, transit, cars, trucks, all of it. In order to get a good feel for how the community viewed transportation and the needs and what were the advantages and disadvantages of the different modes or the system as it existed at the time, the consultants helped the city craft a pretty robust public outreach effort with the idea of gathering as much public input as we could possibly get. And so there were a lot of opportunities to engage with the consultants and with city staff about the study as it was progressing. This really began with an open house right here in the council chambers in April of 2012, first open house where we talked about what we were doing, what we wanted to talk about, what kind of information we wanted to hear from the public. There was a 2-day drop-in workshop. This was actually down at One World Cafe, down on Main Street, October 9th and 10th, was one of those things that was open all day long. Come on in, there's a back room, have a seat, talk about transportation-related issues. Second open house in April of 2014, really talking about, okay, what had they been hearing? What were they hearing from the community, and what kind of information was there? Again, more opportunity for input into the transportation needs and east-west corridors within the city, including the 3rd Street corridor. There was the opportunity to fill out some comment cards. There was opportunity also to do some social media input related to these engagement efforts. So in terms of the methods that people could use to provide input, of course, the comment cards in those workshops, there were maps that were provided at a lot of the workshops and the open houses where people could put their comments directly on the maps, indicate areas where they thought there were concerns, things that could be addressed. There was the consultants were available, staff was available to all these opportunities to have discussions one-on-one with folks about what the plan was doing. There was a social media feature out there where folks could bring comments for online commenting as well. And then in terms of just general advertising, the city did reach out as much as it could, really, to try to help folks be aware of the effort that was going on with the plan. The desire was to really get input on this multimodal plan, talk about all the aspects, and what people thought was needed or what they liked or didn't like within the community. So newspaper advertisements, as you would expect, some email blasts with the university, different press releases that were issued by the city, postings, of course, at City Hall and throughout the downtown. The city's website carried information. There was also a dedicated Moscow on the Move, which is the name of the transportation plan website, that had information about all the meetings and all the different ways to provide input, as well as reaching out on social media through the city's Facebook page and Twitter accounts, and then some blog posts that were put out for a period during the development of the plan. So many opportunities for folks to become engaged within the community through different venues, different media, to provide input on what was in the plan. So it's important, I guess, just to remember that this is something that was several years in development, several years in the process, lots of opportunities for public input about all the components within the plan itself. The final recommendations that came out of the plan, there are a lot of them, but one specifically related to the 3rd Street Bridge is action RT2. And to paraphrase it here just a little bit for sake of space, is essentially was to construct a multimodal full-access bridge on 3rd Street at Paradise Creek. It would include traffic calming measures and bicycle facility enhancements on 3rd Street from the 3rd Street Bridge to Jefferson Street, so pretty much the entire corridor, including, and these are really examples, traffic circles, curb extensions, chicanes, neck downs, really what they're thinking traffic calming features in that short list. It also went on to say that that traffic calming should extend east of Mountain View when the current street end is constructed into its full street connection. And keeping in mind, 3rd Street will eventually head east from Mountain View and swing around to the north all the way up to towards Mountain View Park. And that the final proposed traffic calming features and their location will be determined by future design and community outreach process. So that was really the first point in the plan where they said we are recommending that there should be traffic calming on the corridor. We don't know yet what that traffic calming will be, and that there should be a process later to figure that out. Well, I think we're now to that point with the council's inclusion of the bridge within the 2018 budget, then we're starting down the road of actually developing a project. And something to keep in mind here, there has been some concern expressed in the community about why don't we know what the traffic calming measures are, or why don't we know specifically what the design of the project is going to be. The reason for that is up until yesterday, beginning of the fiscal year, we did not have a project, right? We had a concept that had been discussed, significant amounts of time, but we did not actually have a project. So the city was working other things, many other projects going on. Now that the city council has approved a budget that includes funding for a bridge, we now have a project. So now we will begin this process of figuring out what these things are actually going to look like in a detailed design effort. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about how that will happen here in a few minutes. One other item that came out of the transportation plan was a traffic model. And the idea with traffic modeling is to really take a look at what do we project traffic volumes will be under different scenarios looking out into the future. In this case, the multimodal plan looked at the target year of 2035, which was in excess of 20 years at that time. And they were trying to project through a computer model simulation with anticipated growth within the community of a certain amount of population, university growth with student population, and general traffic patterns, and proposed changes in the traffic system, so new street extensions or connections that didn't exist at the time being installed. What would we see in 2035? So they ran some different scenarios to look at that. But they also had a specific section pertaining to the 3rd Street Bridge because they knew that was a question that folks were concerned about, what would happen. So the model is, as most models are, it is an estimation of what volumes you could anticipate seeing based upon the assumptions that are put into the model. Assumptions like how fast do we grow and what choices people take for roads and modes of transportation. So this information reflects what that model predicted for 2035 on the 3rd Street corridor. And starting on the left-hand side, you see here at City Hall, so just right outside the building here, the model anticipated that the growth of traffic without a bridge, really no changes in the system on 3rd Street, would change from what it was in 2012 at that time, which I believe was around 7,000, up to about 7,800 vehicles per day. So that was the projected growth just in volume of users in the system. Okay? And then if a multimodal bridge was installed with traffic calming included along the corridor, that the projected volume would be about 7,700 vehicles. In the grand scheme of things, 100 vehicles up or down in a model projecting 20 years out, it's essentially saying very little change between a bridge or no bridge at that point on 3rd Street. Now, as you move to the east, as one would expect, you'll start to see greater changes between having a bridge or no bridge because the choices that people make as they traverse that corridor heading to their home or wherever else they're going. So between Buren and Van Polk, that's a good one, Van Buren and Polk Streets, the no bridge option, they're seeing a prediction of 5,800 vehicles a day, and then with the bridge, with traffic calming, possibly a little reduction down to about 5,500 vehicles.
5,835.
5,800 in 2035. These are all 2035 numbers.
Yeah.
Per day, yeah, 5,800 vehicles per day in the year 2035 versus maybe 5,500 vehicles per day in the year 2035. Again, continuing further east between Garfield and Blaine, this is where you start getting past Hayes and where a lot of people currently turn north or south because they use other alternative routes. Is where you start to see the more significant changes between bridge or no bridge. So the model predicted about 1,300 vehicles a day between Garfield and Blaine without a bridge and about 2,800 vehicles a day with a bridge. So there is a change there. Okay? And then as you expect, as you go on to Mountain View, the numbers keep getting a little smaller. Without a bridge, there's really just one block there of Mountain View, of 3rd Street west of Mountain View, so 50 vehicles a day for those few houses versus about 1,800 vehicles a day if a bridge is constructed. One thing to keep in mind here is these numbers, 2,800 and 1,800, while they are modeled as a fairly good-sized change, when you talk 1,300, 2,800, 2,800 vehicles a day, 1,800 vehicles a day is not that uncommon, certainly for collector streets, but even for local streets. I mean, these numbers are not that drastic when you look at the street system within the community. Okay? But thing to keep in mind here is what we're really looking at is what kind of changes could occur based upon the model's projections. It also then took a look at D Street. So D Street at Van Buren, without a bridge, roughly 6,600 projected. With a bridge, 7,400. And you see an increase here. Well, most likely that increase is primarily associated with overall system growth in the community. Okay? The volumes are just going up over that 20 years everywhere. And then between Garfield and Hayes, 6,200 vehicles a day, and then potentially a little bit of a decrease if the bridge goes in because some of those folks that would otherwise turn on Hayes perhaps would stay on 3rd Street, and therefore the traffic on D on the east end would go down a bit. 6th Street, similar type of situation at Harris Street, roughly 6,700 vehicles a day. With the multimodal bridge, about 7,400. So we're still seeing growth. Part of this is probably also due to the fact that there's some assumption that the traffic calming on the corridor will entice some people to take a different route than 3rd Street. And so you would see some folks use 6th Street anyway, right? Even though the bridge is there. And then as you go on to the east, 5,800 without a bridge, dropping to perhaps 4,300 with a bridge. So most of the changes in the traffic patterns really are occurring on the east end of the corridor. What happens really around the high school here and this area near downtown, because we're already seeing the majority of the traffic volumes traversing from downtown to the east at that point, really is not anticipated to change drastically other than just general growth. As you move further east, of course, the people are making choices about where they're going to drive. Then you start seeing some changes on the east end of the corridor. So that's what the model predicted way out in 2035. Okay, another item that has come up in some of the discussions has been, and we've heard it here at the council, has been, has the city changed the speed limits on 3rd Street over the last number of years? So we've gone back and done some research, and what we found was in about 1974, there was a citywide traffic study performed by the Public Works Department, and recommendations of that study were presented to the City Council that addressed traffic speed limits, or really street speed limits, throughout the community. Interestingly enough, they recommended the base speed limit be set at 30 miles per hour. And for all of you who drive in the city, you know it's 25. That's because the City Council said, no, we think 30 is too much, and the City Council dropped it to 25 as the base speed limit throughout the community. And that was done through an ordinance that you see there in December of 1974. But that ordinance also specifically addressed a couple of arterial and collector streets, 3rd Street being among them. It set 3rd Street speed limits from Washington to Van Buren at 25 miles per hour, from Van Buren to Hayes at 30 miles per hour, and from Hayes to the end of 3rd Street at 25. Interestingly enough, these are exactly the same speed limits that they are today. And in our research, it does not appear that they have ever changed in that time since 1974. So it looks like we've stuck with that original set of rules set by the council in 1974. Fort Russell Historic District is out in the east part of the city. Most of you are familiar with this. There's been some discussion about whether or not the corridor passes through the district or in some manner affect the district. So this is a map of the district as it currently exists, and what you can see in red here is the boundary that's been in place for quite a few years. 3rd Street on the map is just right down there. So it's about a block south of the southernmost edge of the district as it exists today. And I phrase it that way because there is a proposal that's out there at the federal government level now to increase the size of the district. So this is the proposed new boundary, and presuming that the folks back in D.C. approved the change, this is what the new district boundary would become. And 3rd Street now, as you can see, is right there on the very southern edge. So the district would border 3rd Street on the north edge of the 3rd Street right-of-way. So the another way to put that is 3rd Street would be adjacent to the district but would not pass through the district. Street classifications, we've talked a little bit about this. The Transportation Commission has addressed this quite a bit as it relates to 3rd Street and the corridor and other streets within the community. The urban area and functional classification map I mentioned earlier was actually approved in 2003. It has a title on it of 2010 map. It did designate 3rd Street from Washington to Mountain View as an existing collector arterial. You say existing because it was saying that's a road that's existing. That map also includes future extensions or future collector arterials, and it was shown as extending east of Mountain View as a future collector arterial on the 2010 map. The 2014 update, as I mentioned earlier, that went through Transportation Commission, recommended a change of 3rd Street classification to minor arterial between Washington and Mountain View, and the Transportation Commission did support that change. And the multimodal plan, when it was adopted by City Council, did also include the recommendation that the 3rd Street corridor be classified as a minor arterial. When it comes to the practical application of the classifications within the City of Moscow, there are not significant differences overall. Okay? And just to step back for a moment, minor arterials are typically addressed as or defined as roadways that gather multiple collectors, multiple neighborhoods, and pass through a community from one side to another, whereas collectors tend to be serving individual neighborhoods on a little bit smaller scale and can still pass through significant portions of the community. When it comes to the city standards, this chart represents what we would require for new streets that are constructed in the collector arterial or minor arterial categories. So the right-of-way width, the minimum width that we would accept in a new section of street would be 70 feet for collector and 90 feet for minor arterial. The street width itself is the same, 34 feet. Sidewalks, there are 6 feet wide for residential areas for minor arterials, or 8 feet wide for industrial commercial areas, minor arterials, as compared to 5 foot wide for collector streets. Number of vehicle lanes is 2 in both cases, and bike lanes are required on both at 5 feet. So in practice, in terms of what a street looks like when you're building new streets, physically there's not a lot of difference here. And there's a difference in the right-of-way width, which is property ownership, and then the sidewalk is wider on the minor arterial. Other than that, the street sections remain the same. When it comes to existing streets, we do not, put into practice an approach where we would say, hey, we have to take this existing street and somehow modify it and expand it to meet whatever the current standard is. What we do is we take a look at what is the existing street, what is the existing right-of-way, is the street complete or not, and then try to complete those streets in a manner that's consistent with what does exist there. So I know there's been some discussion about if 3rd Street was classified one way or the other, that somehow the existing street would have to be changed. And that has not been the practice of the City of Moscow. And again, the adopted standards for these different classifications, as you see here, they're not significantly different on the ground anyway. Okay, so that's some of the history, how we got here, the opportunity we've had to talk about things, what some of the current standards are, and the speed limits, those types of things. So now let's talk about where we go from here. Now that we have a project as funded by the City Council, we have to consider how we're going to move forward. And there are a number of processes here. First off, we'll talk about the bridge design itself. We are in the process right now of obtaining a design consultant. We put out a document called a request for qualifications back in early September. That is something that's publicized, and then qualified engineering firms who feel that they can provide us design services submit their statement of qualifications to the city, and the city then chooses a consultant out of that group, and then ultimately will contract with that firm and give them a notice to proceed to start the design of the bridge itself. We're anticipating that that notice to proceed would be issued in sometime in early November. And you can see here on the right, there's the request for qualifications, selection of the firm in October, doing the design contract in the latter part of October, and then essentially getting folks started in early November. That would ultimately lead to a bridge design that we would put out for bids somewhere around March of next year for the construction of the bridge itself. We would anticipate that that construction would really run probably from April. Well, we'd award the contract in about April, and it would run essentially May through sometime late in the year, October, November of 2018, for completion of the bridge component. Now, the parallel process that would be going along with this is the corridor assessment. And it's what we're calling it, but essentially the idea here is we want to take a look at the entire corridor from Washington Street all the way to Mountain View, and look at how we treat this entire corridor. What is there, what may change, what perhaps should change with changes that occur within the traffic patterns as the bridge is installed. And so that is a process that we'd be doing at the same time that the bridge itself is being designed. Okay? So you'll see it in here in the schedule where we've got a corridor enhancements assessment essentially happening November through March, so through the winter, and then that we would be looking at potential construction of those corridor improvements in that same time frame of May through October of 2018. So the bridge itself, in terms of what will it look like, is somewhat driven by the city's adopted standards. This drawing on the right, which is too small to read, but I will tell you it's an adopted city standard for minor arterials, so it lays out what that street section should look like, and this is where those numbers came from in the chart for minor arterials that talked about the number of lanes and the bike lanes and the size of the sidewalks. That's within this adopted city standard. This was adopted by the City Council back in 2014 by resolution. And in terms of how we would apply it to the corridor itself, this is what we would anticipate would be on the bridge section itself. So we're still looking at 2 vehicle lanes, which is what's out there today, 2 bike lanes that would pass through the area on the bridge, sidewalks on both sides, and most likely we would match the existing street width. And I say that specifically because the standard here is the 36 feet. The existing road on either side of the creek is 44. So most likely, instead of trying to neck the curb down and back out, we would probably just hold that 44 right through the bridge and just match that existing road section that is there today. So that would give us enough room to put in the bike lanes and the vehicle lanes and a sufficiently sized sidewalk. So that's what we're anticipating the bridge configuration to be, and we'll carry that concept into design. Now, in terms of the corridor assessment, there are a lot more moving parts here. So we'll take a few minutes and kind of talk about what those are. The idea, again, as I mentioned, is to run all the way from Washington to Mountain View. So look at the entire corridor, not just the area around the bridge itself. It's something that staff will be doing. So it's an in-house assessment that we'll be working on with help from the Transportation Commission. We will be looking at a variety of different aspects within the corridor and assessing what the changes in traffic patterns might mean to those different aspects in the corridor. So, to talk about what some of those are. On-street parking. Obviously, there's parking on one or both sides of the street pretty much throughout the corridor. It varies depending on where you are. It changes sides of the street when it's only on one side. And in a lot of places, it's on both sides. So there's parking there. We don't necessarily anticipate any changes in the parking at this stage, but that's why we do an assessment to see if there's any reason to make any changes out there. Bicycle facilities are a big one. These pictures represent some recent activities that we've installed. It's the beginning of some of the bike facilities along the corridor. This is actually the buffered bike lane. That's a door zone buffer on the right side there between the bike lane and the cars heading up the hill by the high school. That was installed here in the last month, and it's part of the overall 2016 bike facilities and bike routes plan that was adopted by City Council, was to start installing these kind of facilities. So we'll be looking overall at the corridor and what other kind of facilities might be installed beyond what we've already put in so far. This map is an excerpt out of that 2016 plan, bike routes and facilities plan adopted by the council. So here's the high school. This is 3rd Street in blue, and that kind of a railroad track pinky hatch you see there, that represents bike lanes. And then those lines with the little red dots represents shared travel lanes or shared vehicular lanes. So we would put down what we call sharrows, which is these guys right here, so that the drivers know that the bikers are going to be sharing the lane with them. So what we're looking at is once you hit the top of the hill, Polk Street on through past, essentially almost to Blaine, or just past Blaine, we'd be doing shared roadway through there. And the reason for that, it's only a 30-foot wide road, so there's not really room to put in dedicated bike lanes as we normally see them. And then once the road widens out to the 44 feet east of there all the way to Mountain View and someday beyond, we envision bike lanes through that corridor. So that's the bike lanes on the bike piece that we talked about a minute ago. So that's what's been envisioned as far as the plan. And so we'll be looking at bike facilities and how they fit into the overall scheme of the corridor as part of the assessment. Traffic control, right now, with the exception of Hayes and Blaine, every side street that approaches 3rd is stop control, is a two-way stop system, so just north-south stops. East-west is free-flowing. At Hayes, it's just the opposite, as well as at Blaine, where east-west stop and north-south is free-flowing. We'll be looking at that to see if any changes are appropriate throughout the corridor in terms of how that stop control is currently in place. School zones. We do have school zone out there for Lena Whitmore. It is on 3rd Street as well as Blaine. And this map shows the school zone. The red dot or star represents location of Lena Whitmore Elementary School. 3rd Street is here, Blaine here, and 1st. So everything here you see in yellow is generally where the current school zone area is located. I will tell you it grew in 2012. It used to be that 3rd Street was not within the school zone. It started just north of the intersection. And we did a review of all our school zones back in 2012, felt that this particular one should be expanded just because of the proximity to the school. So it grew to what you see here on the map to include a portion of 3rd Street as well. Again, with something we'll look at. At this point, I don't anticipate any changes to this, but it's something that we want to consider as part of the overall picture. Pedestrian facilities, as I mentioned earlier, transportation looked at this once upon a time. One of the things we identified back then in 2005 and 2007 was I think there were 7 parcels along the corridor that do not currently have sidewalk. So we would look at whether or not it made sense to include sidewalks within the corridor as part of the overall corridor improvements, just to make sure that we've got a fully functional pedestrian route within this corridor. So just the areas where we don't have sidewalks at all in that consideration, but also looking at whether or not we have compliant ramps, ADA ramps, at all of those locations along the route. Public art is a component. All public works facilities and projects within the city of Moscow that are above ground have to essentially put 1% of their project cost towards public art. We don't know yet what public art in this project might look like if it is included in the project itself. There is the alternative to make a payment to the Public Arts Fund in lieu of including it in the project. That's something we'll have to take a look at. I just grabbed a few examples of public arts type things that perhaps could be done from other facilities out there across the country, just to give you some ideas. We do also consider historic lighting or some kind of special lighting perhaps to be part of a public art option. So don't know yet how that will be, but that's something we'll want to talk about in the process of looking at the corridor itself. The last big piece in the overall assessment is traffic calming. And as I mentioned earlier, the transportation plan recommended that the bridge go in, but that traffic calming be included within the corridor. And traffic calming and mobility and accessibility are things the city has worked on off and on for years. At times we've made the paper about, activities that we've had. This particular one had to do with the Mobility Task Force, which was a subset of the Transportation Commission, looking at overall accessibility within the community. But traffic calming is something that I guess there's a lot of different perspectives on what it is. So one of the more common definitions is here, which is that traffic calming uses physical design and other measures to improve safety for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists. It aims to encourage safer, more responsible driving and potentially reduce traffic flow. The big deal with traffic calming is managing speed, because speed is the issue. When you start looking at conflicts that can exist between bicycles and cars or pedestrians and cars, it's what's called a speed differential. So is the car going that much faster than the other mode so that if they interact, there's a real problem, right? So traffic calming is intended to bring the speed of the vehicles down so that that speed differential is as little as possible. Okay? So it isn't necessarily meant to divert traffic or discourage people from using roadways, but it is meant to really address the speed at which people traverse a particular corridor. So that's the thing to keep in mind as you're going through this. The idea is to improve safety and do it through managing the speed of the vehicles. There are different ways to do traffic calming. A lot of them, I've just thrown a couple of quick examples up here, things that we'll look at as possibilities. This is a technique we've used in the city already. We're called curb extensions or curb bulbs, where the curb line that's running along the side of the street jogs towards the center line at intersections. Usually it's about the width of a parking lane if there's one there. And the idea is that the width of the roadway at the intersection is then narrowed. And anytime you narrow things, people feel constrained, they tend to slow down. You manage the speed. So that's one of the techniques. Another way is actually just using bike lanes. By installing bike lanes, you're potentially reducing the size of the travel lanes for the vehicles. Typical travel lanes are 12 or 14 feet wide. If you can get them down to 12 or maybe even 11, that again, they feel constricted, they start to slow down, which then manages the speed issue. So bike lanes are a possibility where the room exists, and that's part of the plan, actually, where the room exists, but also as part of a traffic calming measure, either with or without parking. Other things that are out there, just again, there are many different options. This is called a speed hump. Don't know if it's something we would do or not, but it's something we'll look at as part of the overall picture. Very gentle elevation of the roadway system. In this case, it's where the crossing is for pedestrians. It does cause people to want to slow down a little bit so they don't hit it too quickly. This is an interesting idea where they actually take parking and alternate sides of the street, which then means the center line of the street has to kind of move over, a little bit of a chicane option. So it's just this gentle little movement, which again causes people to slow down a little bit. So managing speed. Funding. Funding's been a question, and one of the things that the city has been working to do over a number of years is really develop a strategic plan, which we did a couple of years ago, and then to implement that strategic plan on an annual basis. So the city did create a strategic plan, and out of that created some major challenge areas that it wanted to address in the near term. One of those had to do with mobility of all modes of transportation through the community. And so in the 2018 budget, the inclusion of the 3rd Street Bridge actually does comply with the desire of the council within the strategic plan to address some of the east-west mobility within the community. So for the bridge, what is currently in the 2018 budget is adopted by the City Council is in the Capital Projects Fund is $580,000 for the construction of the bridge structure itself. Okay? So that is a specific line item within the budget for that purpose. As it relates to the corridor, we don't currently have a specific line item, but the staff has identified funding sources that are potentially available for whatever projects come out of the assessment, and they could vary, so then the programs vary. One of those would be the sidewalk program. I mentioned possibly filling gaps within the corridor. That would be sidewalk money. Another would be pavement management program that could use some of that funding towards improvements to the road system itself. And then there's potential for other capital projects fund revenues to be used towards the corridor traffic calming measures if that ultimately is what is determined by the City Council that we want to build. And, I guess the last thing I just skipped there is that the costs are not yet known, but they'll be determined in that design process for the corridor. So as we figure out what those are, with help from Transportation Commission and other input, we'll figure out then what costs be associated, what funds those costs can be managed from, and bring that back to the City Council.
Well, ask a couple of questions that concern folks in our city is pedestrians and biking. And the sidewalk issue that you talked about here earlier, which makes sense. I mean, you have to have sidewalks all the way through so people can walk easily, because after all, that's what sidewalks are used for, is for folks to walk on. And those bike sharrows for biking as well. So actually the widest part of that street goes from where Mountain View will be, if I get this correct, almost to Blaine. Is that correct?
44 feet, that's
44
correct.
feet, so that's where it'd be an easy, that portion would be very easy to put the sidewalks that we desire, as well as the bike paths. Is that correct?
Yeah, the bike paths would be within that, the bike lanes would be within that 44
Okay.
feet, and then whatever parking we could accommodate within the overall width. Outside of that 44 feet would be, of course, where the sidewalks are located, consistent with what's out there today in terms of their location.
And I also know you're going to be bringing this in front of Transportation Commission, so you're going to be walking through this so we can be talking about all kinds of other ideas, how to achieve these things.
Correct.
That we need to. And one thing that struck my mind, you talked about that ordinance in 1974 about the 25 miles an hour everywhere, except from Van Buren to Hayes, and it's 30 miles an hour, and it's always been 30 miles an hour for 40 plus years. And it just struck me as, and that's speed, of course, is a concern, so maybe that's something the Transportation Commission should look at, and making that 25 miles an hour all the way through that entire strip. And of course, in front of the high school, when students and kids are around, that's 15 miles an hour at that time. Anyway, I'll throw some things out here. Catherine?
Yeah, I just had a question, and it kind of dovetails to what you were talking about. So as I was reading all this stuff, in the code, especially for speed limits, it says that the city engineer can make those changes, and I know you do all the, you put all the counters down and all that kind of stuff, and you all do that all over town all year, right?
We do traffic counts most of the year, obviously not in the winter months with the snowplows out there. They don't agree with each other.
And then, then when you're counting, what you're counting is, can you collect speed off
We
of
do
those,
have the
or
ability to
you
collect
can't?
speed,
Okay.
through a couple different means, and we do counts throughout the community.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that. I had another question, just really quick, because when I was on the bike path tour that we did, one of the members of the commission was asking me about widths of streets and the bike paths sharing with the sidewalks, and you had a picture actually of one of them up there on the slide. And then we started talking about the snow. So when you start, when we start having the snow, I know that you probably already thought about this, but what particular configurations we can generate, you'll present all that, because they're like, people are like, we could do this. I'm like, but I don't know if we can do this because of seasonal stuff.
When you start talking about bike lanes on the street, or even extra wide lanes with sharrows, where the bikes are tending to ride towards the curb line, that's always a consideration about, okay, how do we manage winter operations and gravel and snow accumulation, those types of things. because of the desire to maintain those facilities open for bikes year-round, then the placement of sidewalks becomes very critical. Because if you put sidewalks right up against the back of the curb, you don't have a place to put the snow except in the bike lane. Versus if you put the sidewalks removed from the curb and there's a planter strip or tree lawn of some width, 5 to 10 feet, then that's where we prefer to store the snow, and that way we can clear the bike lanes. So yeah, it's one of those things that varies throughout the community, but the preference is to have the planter strips from the perspective of winter operations to be able to store the snow in those planter strip areas.
One more question.
Okay.
Go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, go ahead.
No, the question had to do, when you were doing the stop signs and you were talking about how, there's the stop signs, everything is the same except for Third and whatever the other one that the stop is.
Hayes and Blaine are the two
Hayes and
outliers.
Blaine.
Mhm.
Do you know do you remember how that came to be, actually, so that it didn't turn into a four-way stop? I'm just out of curiosity because...
Yeah, that long before my time.
Long time, right.
They were here, and the folks that were here when I got here, as I recall in conversations, it was long before their time. So I think they've been that way quite a ways. I suspect at Hayes Street, it really had as much to do with anything that most people are turning north-south because you couldn't continue east. Right.
I got some other things I want to bring up, but I want to hear from Walter.
Les, how is White Avenue beyond Mountain View designated, and what's the curb-to-curb width on it?
White Avenue east of Mountain View, as I recall, is a minor arterial. And I believe it is 46 feet wide, if I remember correctly. It has 3 lanes, has a two-way left turn lane in the middle, plus bike lanes.
So it's wider. It's wider
either
than
46 or 48.
It's wider than our 36-foot arterial standard.
Yes. Keeping in mind that when that street was constructed, that arterial standard was different.
Okay.
This current standard was adopted in 2014. That project was built some years before that.
Okay, and one more, if I may.
Okay.
You said that traffic calming is intended to slow cars down, not necessarily to reduce the quantity of traffic on a street.
That is, in my understanding, the general intent of traffic calming is to reduce speed. Kind of a side effect of that is some folks do not want to slow down and then will choose a different route.
Because the modeling shows the traffic calm
moving people around
estimates
yes.
to be lower than the non-calm.
Right.
Okay.
And that is like I say, it's a side effect of what is generally considered the intent of traffic calming, which is to drop the speed. But as you drop the speed, some people choose to then take a different route because they don't want to drive in a more congested location.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Jim. I'll let you.
I wanted to ask, when we get the bridge completed, since that'll be the first component of the project, will it be traffic studies based on the actual traffic at the outset of the bridge opening before we invest in the traffic calming so that we don't overdo that, or are we going to try to guess what the traffic situation is going to be and then spend a bunch of money on something that maybe we don't need?
Well, that's a consideration I guess the council would need to make if there's any desire to potentially defer traffic calming. The recommendation in the transportation plan was to do them concurrently, and so that's currently the path that we're on. If there's a desire by the council to maybe step back and study the impacts of the bridge and then decide what to do, if anything, at that point, that's an option that the council could take.
Thank you.
Well, I got a question about D Street. I noticed in your presentation, the Fort Russell area, currently part of D Street is in the Fort Russell area. Is that correct?
I believe that is so.
And the way I looked at that was that it will be there even if the Fort Russell area gets reconfigured nationally. That's where it's at? That's
So
new.
there's where it is today.
So part of D Street is...
D is right in there, so
right
just
through there.
just grabs it.
Okay.
And then with the expansion, that north side didn't appear to have changed any, so it really only has just 1 or 2 lots to the north
That caught my eye less. And another thing that caught my eye was, because we've heard a lot of people saying that 3rd Street butts up against Lean and Whitmore, when in fact it looked like 1st Street butts up against Lean and Whitmore on that map that you had with the star on it, that yellow.
As far as the traffic, or excuse me,
It was
go the other way here. The school zones.
There was a school zone, because there was some
the other way.
concern of folks on that. I wanted to take a look at that. It's there somewhere. I seen you had a
Yeah, it's
yellow.
in the assessment section. Then
Right there. Right there. You see that star? That's where Lean and Whitmore is, correct?
Yes,
And
there is a row of one row of lots that front 3rd Street.
That's
right through here.
duplexes or apartments.
Yeah, duplexes and
Okay.
multifamilies through that area. So there is one row of buildings between the Lena Whitmore property and 3rd Street itself.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out. When does this move on to transportation?
We
They'll look at
anticipate that the discussion of traffic calming will begin probably at this month's meeting, which is 2 Thursdays from now. if I recall.
We have a date for that, Gary, so folks will know when it is, so they can be coming to it.
Look it up
And
right now.
Looking at the overall presentation, if I got this right, the 3rd Street Bridge conversation, I can remember this being 30 years ago, but it really took effect in 1994, according to your slide presentation here. So it's been a discussion for 23 years. And the multimodal plan started in October of 2011 and was adopted in October of 2014. And if I recall right, there was 4 different meetings, public meetings and open houses and that type of thing, so people with comments and concerns and talks happened at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, a series of, in the planning process.
I wrote down open house of 2012, April of 2012, October 9th and 10th of 2012.
Yeah, they're on the screen, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's as far as the open houses and the workshops, yeah, in April 25th, October 9, 10, and then April 1st of 14.
Okay, well.
Your Honor, looks like October 12th is the next Transportation Commission meeting.
What time is that meeting?
It's 4 o'clock
4
here
o'clock?
in the chambers.
4
which
o'clock
one?
in council chamber.
And which one of our counselors is the liaison? Catherine is? Okay, all right.
If I would note as well, in response to Councilmember Boland's comments about whether we would wait with moving forward with traffic calming alternatives until the bridge were completed, as Les indicated, traffic calming typically is to moderate the speed of traffic, not reduce volumes. So the direction we've been taking is that they will be developed simultaneously, unless directed
Well, one
otherwise.
thing I was just thinking about this, and that's why I wrote it down, that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit from Van Buren to Hayes, and then we have the rest of it's 25. It seems to me, logically, to have the whole thing 25, because that becomes confusing for people that drive. I know for myself, I usually have to set my cruise controller. I'm going about 70 everywhere I go. And, I'm just saying, thank God for cruise controls, because it saves me from getting tickets. But I think that's something the Transportation Commission should take a look at, Les.
Certainly, as part of the overall assessment, speed limits was one of those components.
Well, great presentation, Les. Thank you very much. We will move on to item number 8 now, resolution consenting to the Pullman Moscow Airport property acquisition and transfer. Gary Reeder, you will have the podium, sir.
Don't you rush on. Thank you, Your Honor. What you have in your packet is a resolution as presented to Public Works Finance last week. This resolution is an adjunct, an extension of the Pullman Moscow Regional Airport runway realignment project. As you know, this project has been moving ahead for several years.
Recently, you've read in the paper that a proposal was given to and accepted by the Regents of Washington State University regarding a property purchase that will occur as part of that project. Tony Bean, the Executive Director of the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport, is here to give a report. I want to thank Tony as a resident of the city of Pullman, sitting through a couple of pretty long sessions tonight. We appreciate that, your tolerance. The reason we're here tonight is the City of Moscow and the City of Pullman are co-sponsors of the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport as designated by the Federal Aviation Administration. As sponsors, we cooperate with each other in the operation of the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport Board, which has the management control of the airport and, in fact, employs Tony Bean as executive director. One of the things in that agreement, the latest sponsorship agreement and intergovernmental agreement between the City of Moscow and the City of Pullman regarding the airport, is that any purchase, transfer, or sale of property by the airport will be accomplished only with the unanimous consent of both of the sponsors, meaning both the City of Pullman and the City of Moscow. So what you have in your packet is a draft resolution authorizing the City of Pullman as both the fiscal agent for the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport Board, as well as the entity which will move forward with the purchase on behalf of the airport, and property purchase will be held in the name of the City of Pullman according to the agreement. You have a copy of a resolution on your desk, which we were just able to get to you today. The Pullman City Council considered the resolution for the purchase of the properties that Tony will be explaining to you in a moment. And it is necessary for our City Council also to move forward with a resolution, a like resolution authorizing the City of Pullman to purchase this property with those funds on behalf of the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport. So with that, rather than I muck this up anymore, I'll call Tony up, if that's all right with you, Your Honor, and he will explain exactly what will be purchased and the processes to be employed from here on out.
Thank you, Gary. Tony, please come up. And how are you doing this evening, Tony? Thank you for being with us the last couple hours.
Always good to listen to citizens and issues and things that city councils have to listen to. It makes me feel a lot better about some of the issues that we have with the airport, because we're not alone in any of those issues that exist in any other municipal organization. So the picture that you see in front of you is really kind of depicts what kicked off the whole conversation with Washington State University and the purchase of the property, and what the red trapezoid that you see here is known as a runway protection zone. And the FAA, in 2011, we started our environmental process, and they changed the guidance on what could be in a runway protection zone. And the guidance became try to get everything out of it. Instead of these are the things that can be in it, and they changed. They basically said try to get everything out if you're going to change it. And a lot of land use around airports is basically do no more harm. You're trying to do less, have less impacts. The reason that it's protected, why it's called a protection zone, is land in this area, looking at all the studies that we've had with aviation accidents across the country and across the world, that's predominantly where they occur. And so it is there for the protection of people and property on the ground. So the first part we started with was doing a memo on that zone with the FAA and going, okay, well, can we take Terraview Drive out? Well, to do that, you'd have to move this much of a golf course, and moving 2 holes out of a golf course, it's not feasible because you can't move 2, you've got to move 9. And Palouse Ridge Golf Course has awards and other things that if you did change it with the designer being deceased, if you did change it, you would fundamentally, completely change and not be able to get back the character of the course the way that it is. The other issue that we had was response time from the City of Pullman. We're required to have a response in 15 minutes or less, and to be able to have to route that around Terraview's direct access to the terminal building, we couldn't meet the response time. So the decision was made at the time with the FAA that okay, we're going to work forward on trying to purchase under the Uniform Relocation Act the areas in the runway protection zone plus the other areas that are necessary for the construction and earthwork, those kinds of pieces with the FAA and the project itself. So this is a little awkward. Let's see. This shows it, and I don't know if there's a better way to do that where you can see the picture by itself. It's kind of a goofy thing, but there's a bunch of different colors on there, which you see, and where it's blue. Probably get a little better. I think I made it bigger. Yeah.
Presto.
Okay, that works. Thank you. So where you see the blue area, because you can't see the legend, and after doing this for 2.5 years with this particular negotiation, I don't need the legend anymore. The blue area is fee simple acquisition, which is the preferred purchase method of the federal agency that the sponsors undertake full control of that property and try to get fee simple acquisition, meaning that the airport owns it and controls it. So the airport would control the development under the guidelines and requirements of the Federal Aviation Administration. So the portion in the RPZ that is here is fee simple, and then everything that is outside of that is more along the lines of needed for the construction of the runway itself. We're either borrowing earthwork from it, reducing the heights of obstructions that are in it, or building a haul road out of it. The pieces that are in pink are what are known as navigation easements, and they're kind of unique. And it's funny that Rob Parrish is sitting in here because he did one over here, and what basically a navigation easement is we're buying the airspace and development rights to your property. So the property stays in the use of the city, or this case, Washington State University, and the airport dictates what can be built there, what heights, and make sure that we don't have restrictions for those pieces, but we still have controls as required by FAA. So the yellow piece in here is kind of a unique piece. This is a transfer of land. There was a corridor that was supposed to be the bypass for the city of Pullman, and the corridor went right here. And it was called SR 276. It was the full access rights, and the property were purchased by the state in the 70s, but it wasn't on anybody's plans to build the right-of-way. The city of Pullman didn't support it. It wasn't supported by the university. It wasn't supported by the county, and it was extremely expensive to build. So what happened with that was we went to the state highway department and said, if you're not going to build this in any plans, and it can't be in this area, can we purchase this? And the state agreed that we could purchase it. So we purchased the corridor, but this little piece right here has a very unique, need with the College of Agriculture and the orchard that's there. It's a piece that's known as the World's Orchard. And what WSU did was they laid out a map of the globe, and similar to the Arboretum here in Moscow, they planted trees from that particular part of the country in this orchard, and it was important to them to keep it. We needed it for a haul route, so the agreement was made, okay, well, we'll do this if you'll trade a haul route to go around. And that's what that depicts. But the whole part about the negotiation process with the university and any other negotiating partner that we have, it's very awkward when you start out with a negotiation where you're using federal money, because it's not like me coming to you and buying your house. If we talked about buying a house, we'd probably get to a figure fairly quickly. And in the case of the Uniform Relocation Act, we don't start that way. We aren't allowed to talk to the landowner at all until we have an appraisal, and then we show up to the landowner and say, here, this is what we'd like to give you for your property. There's no discussion prior to that, and all of a sudden you have an offer, which most people just abjectly, they say no and they reject it out of sorts. And then you get to start talking about negotiation because you're using public financing. It's not your money or my money. It's the public's funding. And in this case, this became very awkward where a university was concerned because it wasn't simply something that you could look at and say, this is farmland, and farmland goes for this rate. This is a building, a commercial building, and a commercial building goes for this rate. There was a lot of discussion, and the reason it took over 2 years to work this out was we didn't have the opportunity in the environmental to go through these buildings and figure out what they were. They look like steel structures. If you drive up Terraview and you're looking at them, there's nothing real special about looking at any of them. They look like a steel building with a concrete base. And when you get into them, they're quite specialized in various pieces. So the first offer was made of here's land value, here's property value for buildings, and here's the relocation benefits that are provided under the Uniform Relocation Act, and they're capped at $25,000, and here's an offer. That didn't work well with the university because we didn't know everything we needed to know, so we started discussions. And one of the things we realized right away is this is not like moving a convenience store or something with a regular inventory. It's research, and you're not moving these kinds of things and the improvements in these buildings. They're a lot harder to move. So what we had done was a third-party consultant that does a lot of relocation work with the federal government under the Uniform Relocation Act. And he said, okay, you're an independent third party. It's not the university and it's not the airport or the cities that are saying value this. It's a specialized moving company that does this. Go through these buildings, strip the buildings down to their absolute values, and look at all these specialized improvements that are in these buildings. Stuff like they've got air handling units that are specific for making sure that a building is pressurized and that the air can't get in or out. They don't contaminate the research process. It's things like specialized coatings on a concrete floor to make that building biohazard level 3 capable. It's different lift structures or different things that are in these buildings that you would not find anywhere else. They don't exist in any other realm or field, and they do exist in the research world. So I've heard some people, well, we bought research. We didn't buy research. We bought specialized improvements that are in the buildings that are eligible under the Uniform Relocation Act, but we had to have somebody come and tell us what those things were, and that was the basis of the offer that was accepted by the regents. And we bought to the extent where we purchased trees in the orchard. What is that worth? What does it cost to transplant a tree? And what does it cost to graft? And so we went through those pieces and had a long discussion with folks at Washington State University in getting to where we are today. But we looked for legal guidance or precedent or anything that we could find where the Federal Aviation Administration had purchased research. We didn't find anything. So then we went to highways, federal highways. Have you purchased anything that was a research base? We found one case in the 70s on the East Coast, and it had to do with turf, which did not help us very much. So this is unique. It's not done. There's nothing that the FAA didn't have anything that they could hand us and say, here's a guideline to try to figure this one out after we've already been through purchasing a building and purchasing various pieces of land, the university itself. And the uses with the research structures in those buildings are quite unique. With that said, that's kind of the basic nutshell of moving forward. I'll take questions because I'm sure there are.
Well, Jim, this was spoke about in Public Works and Finance last Monday.
Right. Tony gave the same presentation, and the reason I wanted it on the regular agenda is because I thought everybody on the council should be aware of this land acquisition thing, because it is kind of freaky looking with the different shapes and colors, and I wanted everybody to have an understanding because they're probably going to get questions from people around town about it.
One thing I will say, that one blue looks like an almost upside down Idaho.
Yep.
If you look at it.
Very close.
It's one of the things.
If you squint really, really hard, yeah.
So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Art.
So now that we're thinking about acquiring this, what happens to the buildings?
Okay, so here's what's happening moving forward. The City of Pullman passed their resolution on the 26th, which was last Tuesday. And one of the conditions that we have to try to figure out is how are we going to construct and relocate research at the same time? Because what the regents agreed to was on our end accepting the offer, and on their end taking the offer and converting it into funds to relocate the buildings that are in here. And the buildings, a lot of the buildings that are in there are going to be demolished with the project. And it may take us some time to get through that, but we've got at least 1 year of working with the university to balance the research need with the construction timeline. And so there's going to be a lot of coordination that would not normally happen with another entity that we're going to have to really work hard to try to figure out, okay, and we've asked a lot of questions of the university and the research, what are the standards? How many decibels? How much vibration? What constitutes a change in your research that you can't document or try to objectify in some means? And so there's a lot of work that's going to be done with the various units, but the biggest pieces that are in here, you know, the research, that's the teaching that happens at the Tukey Orchard, that's not very sensitive to anything as far as construction impact, as long as the things get moved. But there's animal research that happens down there with both USDA and animal sciences with Washington State University that does require a lot of coordination and how do they move those animals, because they're long-term research projects, and some of them they're 20-year research and they're in year 8 or they're in year 12, and we don't want to be breaking that up. So we're understanding from the university's point, but our point is, okay, help us help you and try to educate us and help us figure out what an impact is and what it isn't, so we can responsibly move forward with our construction date. Because we have what is known as a publication date with the FAA now, and that is the date that the runway is open and that approach procedures are in and a pilot can land on a new runway. That date's 10/10 of 2019. To slide that date would jeopardize our project, but it affects projects all over the country because of the amount of grant funding that this project is pulling in, and all of a sudden FAA has a whole bunch of discretionary money, and not that they don't have problems as it is right now with funding, with Congress doing 6-month extensions and things like that. It's problematic. So we're working with them to figure that out, but a lot of those buildings that are in there will be removed with project, and the light lane that you see, the strobe lights, it's called a Mauser is what it's called, but that goes right down the middle of this. It lines up at the runway. So one pole's going to end up in the middle of one of the parking lots, one of them ends up next to TerraView, and we're working out the details with the FAA on the design of that right now.
So they gradually sort of fade away.
Walter?
Tony, in the trapezoid, is there any dirt movement in that, or just getting the buildings and the research out?
There's going to be earthwork all the way up to the back of the buildings. So this will all be changed.
Okay. The agreement before us, like the Pullman agreement, doesn't have any timelines in it. It just says we'll do the deal.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions for Tony? What action would the council like? Jim?
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we approve the attached resolution.
I second it.
Okay, we got a motion by Jim and a second by Art to go ahead and approve the attached resolution concerning the Pullman Moscow Airport property acquisition and transfer. I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
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 Okay, well, thank you very much, Tony. We will move on to our next item, which is item number 9, Tiger Grant application, Mountain View Corridor report by Elisa Anderson. Hello, Elisa.
Hi.
Hang on one second before you start that. For all you kids that were here for the journalism class, thank you very much for hanging in there with us. So I don't know if you're sticking around or if you're leaving, but you're very patient with us. Thank you.
Kenton, you got a half dozen going to hang in back there with you.
Take names.
Give 'em extra points.
Extra credit.
If they know what tiger means, too.
Whoa. Okay, I think I need help too, Bill. Full screen. Which one is it?
Down the one down there.
Hit the fat button down there. The big button.
This
Is
one?
that right there? To the right. To the right.
It's cool.
The one.
Shoot.
Yeah.
There you go.
Walter. Nothing like being the closing act tonight, huh? My report tonight is just to bring you up to speed on where we are with preparing a grant application for the FY 2017 Tiger funding. As you know, we applied last year and we were not awarded. We were told in a debriefing session that we submitted an excellent application. It made it to the secretary's desk. However, we were in the wrong geographical location to receive funding in that round. So we're moving forward with an application again this year. And the criteria has changed just a little bit for the upcoming round, and it's in our favor. Special consideration is being given to rural projects, and that is a community that's 50,000 or less. And so the components in a rural project that they're looking for is to improve access to reliable, safe, and affordable transportation, improve infrastructure condition, access to public health and safety, promote regional connectivity, and facilitate economic growth and competitiveness. And those are all things that we had addressed in our previous application. However, it just happens to fall now that it's more of a specialized focus, and that really actually is good for us. Just one of the things to mention, we had named the project last year the East Moscow Multimodal Infrastructure Project, and it incorporated several projects that were completed in the last fiscal year. In your handout, it listed those, but the projects on D Street for infrastructure, and then by the Moscow Middle School, those types of things. And the Ball Fields project was one of those too. So we had several projects that were listed in our application last year that we're going to need to adjust the project costs and take that out. Some of those numbers included match money that we had incorporated into our total project costs. So looking at this upcoming round, we still have the same project components. We have the area, the larger section there, which is 6th Street, 6th Street, all the way around in front of Mountain View Park. The majority of those improvements are from F Street around to the park. Most of that area is already completed. The section you see in the black area there is a project that's been funded through ITD under the Local Highway Technical Assistance Council. It's called our STP Urban Project, and that is the one that completes the infrastructure between Joseph and 6th Street, and also included a proposed roundabout at the corner of 6th and Mountain View. Also included in this area, we have a bridge to replace the existing bridge on 6th Street and Mountain View. It's a culvert bridge at this point, and we would turn that into a multimodal bridge that would have sidewalk, and I think bike lane was included in that also, and also change the dynamic of the culvert situation there isn't the greatest right now for the Paradise Creek area, and it really needs to be improved environmentally. There'll be some benefits to the changes to that. And then the next section we're looking at is White to Joseph, and then State Highway 8 to White. So there's the different components, and we have broken them down so that we have project costs divided for each of those in case they aren't able to fund all of it, or they ask us to reduce our project scope. We have some options available in there. The total project is 1.54 miles. It includes road widening with 2 travel lanes and turn lanes where needed, curb gutter, bike lane, sidewalks on both sides, or a path system. And we also then have a proposed roundabout on Joseph Street. The project would also include a
traffic signal at State Highway in Mountain View. And as I just had stated, we'll replace the bridge on 6th and Mountain View. It also includes the utility improvements, retaining walls where needed, and then we'll also need to do some right-of-way purchase and possibly some easements throughout the corridor in order to make all the room for all of the infrastructure improvements that we need to do. One of the focuses of the Tiger program is that there's a benefit cost analysis within that, and you have to have several project benefits to meet and that we have to address. And so these are the ones that we addressed in our last application, and they are still feasible under this application. We have re-engaged FCS consultants who helped us prepare the last benefit cost analysis for the application, and they're working with us again, updating our data and working with us to look and see if there's other types of benefits we can highlight in this application. Again, these are additional project benefits that we'll be addressing, things that the project will benefit the community, the roadway, the environment, those types of things. Our anticipated request amount is going to be approximately $18 million. Matching funds are not required for a rural community. However, they're encouraged in order to be competitive. In our last request, we estimated our match to be approximately $3.4 million. The project has been reduced because of those other projects that are now completed. So what we're looking at is Les and I will be bringing forth additional information to you next Monday at committee. We plan to present to both committees. And the reason for that is the submittal date is October 16th. However, there is a huge problem submitting on the day of the due date, and so we really need to get that application submitted. For my own sanity, hopefully by Friday, October 13th, at least have our major components in there, and we can do a resubmittal if we need to, or we can also decline to submit if we need to, but we're really focused on trying to get it done by the 13th. They would look at making an award announcement in the early spring of 2018. They require that we have all of the funds obligated by September 30, 2020, and prior to obligation, we would need to have our environmental analysis done and have the right-of-way and the easements completed and have preliminary design completed. The project costs have to all be expended by October 30th, 2025. Just a couple of notes here. I did look at the Idaho Transportation Improvement Plan last Friday, and the STP Urban Project is scheduled for construction in 23-24, which falls very well with a proposed project here. If we were awarded, we could hopefully we could schedule everything so that the entire project could be completed at one time. And as I said earlier, we're focused on bringing additional information to you at committee on Monday for both committees, and then we would be coming forth with the final outcome of the application with a summary on October 16th and be requesting ratification at that point in time. Just a couple of other footnotes to this. As I said, we'll be having a reduced project scope and cost because of the projects that have already been completed. And I think, just to abbreviated session of updating you for tonight, I think that is all that I had on my notes.
So the update that you wanted to present, the report that you were presenting to the council, you want everyone up here to be aware of what you're going to be bringing forward next Monday at Public Works and Finance and Admin, getting the sign-off then, getting the application, and then bringing the final report back on the 16th to council. Is that correct?
For ratification, okay. Yes.
Okay. Walter?
Thank you, Mayor. A few questions. Can you count the completed projects as match, like we do in block grant?
Not the ones that were completed in a prior fiscal year. Anything that may happen from the point that the Transportation Secretary says you have been awarded, and that could be a year and a half before you actually get your funds obligated. So they'll let you include those projects and those funds.
Like maybe the 3rd Street Bridge.
That could be an option.
Okay, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
For less, are the Mountain View bridges, the current Mountain View bridges, all compatible with the width that this is proposing?
I believe that is the case. They were constructed actually prior to my time here, but in looking at them over the years, I believe that they are wide enough to accommodate this.
I was thinking I might have heard over the years a rumor or a statement or question as to whether or not one, and I don't know which one, might be smaller than the others, but I'm sure you'll check on that. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, is the east-west Mountain View from what we used to call the first 90 to the second 90, is that all in the city?
No, it is not currently all in the city, and so that's part of what we'd have to work through with the Highway District.
Would it need to be in the city to do this?
The section between
Mountain View Park and a portion, kind of in the middle of that east-west
Yeah,
section.
I'm looking at the city boundaries, and there's a section that we'll need to have probably an agreement with the Highway District to do those improvements. And we had a letter in the last application from the Highway District for that. At that point in time, they had also committed to possibly including rock, yes.
Okay, and finally, a rough idea of how much right-of-way will have to be acquired? You're going to need it for the roundabout at 6th.
Certainly at the roundabout locations, the 6th Street would be the other project. Joseph potentially would need it as part of the Tiger project, and that east-west section is where it's narrowest, and so potentially we'd need right-of-way through that area. We will have to lay out the actual footprint with the existing right-of-way and see what we've got to work with.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the report. Unless you got other things you want to add, we'll move
Just
on.
one note that once a project is chosen by the Transportation Secretary, then they hand us over to work with our State Department of Transportation to really put the whole project together and meet all the guidelines, so that we would be working with the Idaho Transportation Department at that point. And we have a great relationship with them, so I don't anticipate any problems.
Thank you, Lisa. I think the committees will be looking forward to seeing your presentation next Monday.
Thank you.
With that ends our meeting tonight, with the exception of reports. I'll start it out with you, Jim.
I have nothing to report, sir.
Okay, that makes it easy. We'll go right down the line to Arthur.
Yeah. Two things have come up. Urban Renewal Agency had a meeting on the 21st and discussed a lot of administrative and housekeeping issues at that particular meeting. Clearwater Economic Development Association met on the 31st of September. The big item there was the establishment of a technical training program in conjunction with LCSC for workforce training in electricals and metalworking, and that's proceeding along, and that'll also involve the University of Idaho as a co-sponsor on that project. So finally, getting some technical training schools going in North Idaho. Human Rights Commission met on the 19th, and we did a lot of that stuff here this very evening with the renaming of Columbus Day for the city. Also of note is a talk by Major Margaret Witt at the law school courtroom on the 5th at 7 p.m., so that'll be well attended. She's one of the first to push forward the Don't Ask, Don't Tell torpedoing and getting rid of that. Tomorrow is Tree Commission, and beyond that, the Clearwater RC and DC meeting on the 5th down in Orofino. And that's what I've got.
Okay. Walter.
I attended the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on September 27. Two or three items of note. They are continuing to review the 2009 comprehensive plan, which is being updated and they went through the Parks and Rec Chapter 4 and the Public Utilities Chapter 5. Also, a few comments about possible additional changes to the use table ordinance. As Paul Kimball mentioned earlier, last week on the 28th, there was the 2017 Inland Northwest Partners meeting up at the golf course at the Coeur d'Alene Casino. And that keynote speaker was the gentleman that talked about 13 ways to kill your community. It was extremely well attended. Gina attended it. Some of her PEP people were also there, and good turnout. So a lot of people from other parts of the state that we bump into occasionally could catch up just a little bit at the breaks.
All right, Catherine.
Parks and Rec, the commission did their presentation tonight. It's really great. They're finally full commission again, which is really good. And then transportation's coming up.
Gina.
Oh, that was fast.
Yeah, I know.
I attended the Inland Northwest Partners meeting, not with Walter, but in the same room as Walter. It was excellent.
Surprised to see each other.
It was kind of a surprise. And then I also attended the PBAC monthly meeting a week ago, last Thursday, and we're getting ready for the Water Summit as we are also working on the beginnings of the community outreach for the 4 alternative water supply options.
I, like Jim, have, nothing to report.
Okay, well, the only thing I have to report was the airport board meeting I was at September 27th, and you guys heard all of it from Tony this evening, so I haven't got nothing further to add. Gary, do you have anything for us?
No, sir, I have no report.
Okay, I
Have
would
a
look from
meeting on Wednesday.
the quarterly breakfast.
7 a.m. Wednesday.
At Banyan's up the ridge,
And I will
WSU
be-
is hosting.
And I will not be there because of another
I will
commitment.
attend on staff's behalf.
Yes, you will.
And
I
the URA on Thursday, come to think of it.
will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Your Honor.
Second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned, folks, at 9:47. Thank you all.
Not bad.
You over under on